Chapter 1293. To Qin Chuan, what he needed the most was time. Whether it was the flipping sky seal, the 10,000 goblin seal, or the little armored dragon, their mission now was to buy time for Qin Chuan, even if it was only for a minute. When Furo saw the flipping sky seal and the 10,000 goblin seal, he couldn't help but reveal a look of disdain. You actually want to use these two divine artifacts to buy time? You are underestimating me. The 10,000 goblin seal was a supreme divine artifact, but the flipping sky seal was only a middle divine artifact due to its spirituality being damaged. If the flipping sky seal was still a supreme divine artifact, perhaps these two seals could cause some trouble for Furo. Unfortunately, the flipping sky seal hadn't recovered yet. Just as Furo was about to destroy the 10,000 goblin seal and the flipping sky seal, he saw the 10,000 goblin seal and the flipping sky seal fiercely colliding with each other. They rapidly melted and merged into one. What is this? Furo was extremely shocked. This was the first time he had seen such a special thing. Two divine artifacts had actually merged by themselves. When the 10,000 goblin seal and the flipping sky seal merged, the new seal that was born suddenly exploded with an extremely powerful aura. It rushed in all directions and actually caused the adverse weather changes within a radius of 1,000 meters to slow down. Buzz. On the new seal, the words heaven and demon slowly appeared. They turned into the golden shadow of a person and the shadow of an enormous dragon, which attacked Fu brazenly. This time, the cold smile on Furo's face had already disappeared. He had become solemn. Just the combination of the 10,000 goblin seal and the flipping sky seal might not cause any trouble for Furo. However, when the two seals merged into a new heaven goblin seal, its power was definitely not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. The current heaven goblin seal could be said to be infinitely close to a divine artifact. If the flipping sky seal's spirituality had not been damaged, perhaps the heaven goblin seal would have directly transformed into a divine artifact. However, even if it was infinitely close to a divine artifact, it was enough to give Furo a headache for a while. Duang. The colossal dragon's shadow ruthlessly crashed into Furo. Furo raised his hand and punched out, blocking the colossal dragon's attack. On the other side, the colossal dragon's shadow held a long sword and accurately pierced it towards Furo's chest, filled with killing intent. Whoosh! Fu Ao opened his mouth, and a pitch-black palm-sized blade flew out, clashing with the figure. This blade was called Ghost Mist, and it was a life-bound magic treasure that Fu Ao had refined when he was still a nobody. Now, it had grown into a top-grade saint artifact. Ding-ding-dong-dong. The illusory figure fought fiercely with the ghostly fog, and it temporarily had no time to attack Furl. Furl took this opportunity to punch the illusory dragon again, wanting to shatter the illusory dragon. However, the illusory dragon's resistance exceeded Furl's expectations. His powerful strength actually failed to shatter the illusory dragon. Damn you! Earlier, Fu didn't use his full strength because he didn't want to cause damage to the Millstone continent. But now, he couldn't endure it any longer. The immortal energy in his body surged and poured into his right fist. When he punched out once more, the enormous dragon phantom suddenly exploded with a wail and shattered with a bang. Without Qin Chuan's control, even the heavenly demon seal that was infinitely close to a divine weapon could not withstand the powerful immortal energy. After dealing with the giant dragon's shadow, Fu Ao attacked again, directly crushing the figure's shadow. The destruction of the giant dragon's shadow and the figure's shadow greatly reduced the 10,000 demon seal's spirituality, and it was unable to fight again. Fu Ao was not in the mood to care about the 10,000 demon seal for the time being. He went straight for Qin Chuan. On the other side, Guru sensed the battle fluctuations not far away. He originally thought that he could find Qin Chuan first, but he didn't expect that the little armored dragon would suddenly appear and block his path. King of Sacred Armor? Guru looked at the little armored dragon that suddenly appeared and couldn't help but be stunned. How could there be a king of sacred armor in such a place? The little armored dragon's existence had always been a secret, and only a few people knew about it. Obviously, Guru didn't belong to those few people. It was also because of this that when he saw the little armored dragon, Guru was stunned. "Don't go over." The little armored dragon opened its arms and blocked in front of Guru, not allowing Guru to get close to Qinchuan. Guru was even more shocked now. He actually encountered a king of sacred armor that could speak. This king of sacred armor can actually speak. It seems that it and Qinchuan are together? Guru felt a little dizzy. The king of sacred armor had always been Zerg's exclusive sacred beast. How could it fall into the hands of a human? Moreover, it seemed to have evolved to an extremely high level of intelligence. One had to know that even the king of sacred armor in the hands of the king of sacred armor was only slightly larger in size. Although Guru didn't know how Qinchuan obtained the little armored dragon, it didn't affect his desire for the little armored dragon. If he could subdue the little armored dragon, his strength would be greatly improved. Thinking of this, Guru immediately opened his mouth and chanted a string of strange incantations. These incantations turned into a white chain in the air and wrapped around the little armored dragon. However, the white chain had only just approached the little armored dragon when it was bitten by the little armored dragon. Crack! When he saw the little armored dragon bite the white chain and swallow it into its stomach, Guru's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. What the hell is this? The little armored dragon swallowed the broken white chain into its stomach, then raised its hand and patted its round belly. It said to Guru, again. Looking at the little armored dragon's look of wanting to eat him dry, Guru's expression could be said to be extremely interesting. At this time, he could already see that it was not easy to subdue the little armored dragon in a short period of time with his methods. Therefore, he should first kill Qinchuan and wait until the little armored dragon became ownerless before thinking of a way to subdue it. Thinking of this, Guru raised his hand and waved at the little armored dragon, wanting to chase it aside. However, the little armored dragon did not move at all and stood straight in front of him. Seeing this scene, Guru frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "Get lost." As he spoke, Guru punched out and immortal energy gushed out. He wanted to use immortal energy to directly repel the little armored dragon. However, what shocked Guru was that when the little armored dragon faced the immortal energy attack, it actually opened its mouth and swallowed the immortal energy into its stomach. Burp! The little armored dragon let out a burp, grinned, and said cheerfully, "Delicious! What the hell is this thing? I've never heard of a king of sacred armor that can devour immortal power." Guru was truly a little frightened by the little armored dragon. The supreme existence of the Tribulation Transcendence stage could crush cultivators of lower realms by relying on their incomparably powerful immortal energy. But now, immortal energy was useless against the little armored dragon. Just as Guru was thinking of this, he suddenly saw the little armored dragon's face reveal a hint of pain. Then, the little armored dragon opened its mouth and spat out a small amount of immortal power. Chapter 1294. When he saw the little armored dragon spit out some of the immortal power it had swallowed, Guru instantly understood. Although the little armored dragon could swallow immortal power, there was a limit. "I see. Your stomach is not a bottomless pit." After discovering that the little armored dragon had a limit to its devouring, Guru was relieved. He raised his hand and sent another wave of immortal energy at the little armored dragon. This time, the little armored dragon had a bitter expression. It really couldn't eat anymore. Bang! The immortal power pushed the little armored dragon back. Guru took the opportunity to rush toward Qinchuan. Qinchuan could clearly see everything that was happening around him through his powerful spiritual power. He saw the 10,000 demon seal, and the cyclic sky seal giving up the chance to transform into divine artifacts and fusing into the heavenly demon seal in order to block Furo. He saw the little armored dragon desperately swallowing immortal power in order to block Guru. He saw the damaged heavenly demon seal chasing after Furo with all its might. It kept attacking just to delay Furo for a little bit more time. He also saw the little armored dragon fiercely biting Guru's shoulder. No matter how Guru attacked, it would not let go. Whether it was the heavenly demon seal or the little armored dragon, in order to protect him and give him enough time to complete the final training, they used all methods. Qin Chuan, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, slowly opened his eyes. He looked at the heavenly demon seal behind Furo and the little armored dragon that Guru had forcefully pulled off his shoulder and thrown out. He revealed a gentle expression and said softly, "You have done enough. Leave the rest to me." Rumble. Dark and heavy tribulation clouds converged above Millstone Continent, and they blotted out the sky and blotted out the sun, causing the adverse weather changes to practically instantly stop and disperse. Furo and Guru stopped advancing when they were only 1,000 meters away from Qin Chuan. Qin Chuan had already triggered the immortal tribulation. They had no way to kill Qin Chuan now. If they rashly approached Qin Chuan, they would even become the target of the immortal tribulation. We were still one step too late. Fu's expression was extremely gloomy. If it wasn't for the heavenly demon seal, he would definitely be able to kill Qin Chuan before Qin Chuan triggered the immortal tribulation. At this time, Guru's face was also extremely ugly. He did not expect that Qin Chuan had actually reached this step and triggered the immortal tribulation. From this, it could be seen how magical this continent was. At this time, Fadertic, who was guarding outside, also noticed the tribulation clouds condensing above the Millstone Continent. The thing he was most worried about had happened. Qin Chuan had triggered the immortal tribulation. Feed Tech quickly arrived beside Furo and Guru. With a gloomy face, he asked, "What's wrong with you two?" Facing Fidertic's question, Frio coldly snorted and said, "Do you think we want to see him trigger the immortal tribulation? We were all stopped, that's all." With the power of the heavenly demon seal, even Feed Tech would be delayed for at least 3 to 5 minutes. He was only delayed for 3 to 5 minutes before Qin Chuan triggered the immortal tribulation. There was nothing he could do. Let's not blame each other now. Let's think about how to deal with Qin Chuan later. Guru looked at Qin Chuan with a somewhat fearful expression. Once Qin Chuan successfully advanced to the crossing calamity stage and controlled the heavenly demon seal, with the help of the little armored dragon, even if the three of them wanted to deal with Qin Chuan, it would take some effort. Moreover, these were not Qin Chuan's trump cards. What really made Guru feel fearful was Qin Chuan's space and time laws. No one knew how terrifying Qin Chuan's attainments in the space and time laws would become after he advanced to the crossing calamity stage. "I hope he can be struck to death by the immortal tribulation." Frio looked at the tribulation clouds above Qin Chuan's head and coldly snorted. It would be best if Qin Chuan died under the immortal tribulation. However, Frio also knew that all of this was just his wishful thinking. Qin Chuan controlled the lightning laws, so the probability of him dying under the immortal tribulation was extremely small. Rumble. Within the tribulation clouds, the rumbling of thunder shook the heavens and earth. Lightning dragons rolled and roared, and the pressure was astonishing. Feed Tech and the other two had no choice but to retreat from the Millstone Continent and give Qin Chuan space. At this moment, Qin Chuan was not in the mood to pay attention to Feed Tech and the other two for the time being. He focused all of his attention on the tribulation clouds in the sky. Looking at the tribulation clouds that almost covered the entire Millstone Continent, Qin Chuan's expression could not help but become somewhat excited. As long as he survived this immortal tribulation, he would be able to advance to the tribulation passing stage. At that time, he would no longer have to fear Feed Tech and the other two. When I was crossing the minor tribulation of the perfected form combination realm, the pressure of the lightning tribulation compared to the immortal tribulation I'm facing now is like heaven and earth. There is no comparison at all. To Qinchuan, crossing a minor tribulation was very easy. However, facing the immortal tribulation, even if Qinchuan controlled the lightning laws, he still did not dare to be careless. When the lightning energy within the tribulation clouds gradually gathered into a ball, the immortal tribulation finally descended. Different from what Qinchuan had imagined, the immortal tribulation was not like the lightning tribulation from before, which struck down from the tribulation clouds. Instead, it condensed into a ball of white lightning about 1 meter in diameter and shot out like a cannonball. The moment this ball of immortal tribulation approached Qinchuan, it suddenly exploded. The white lightning instantly turned the space within a radius of 10,000 miles around Qinchuan into a white world. The sound of thunder roaring was earth-shattering, and the entire continent was trembling. When the immortal tribulation force entered Qinchuan's body, Qinchuan felt the power in his body like a barrel of explosives, and the immortal tribulation force was the fuse that ignited the power in his body and violently attacked his body from the inside out. The extreme destructive power made Qinchuan unable to bear it, and he cried out in pain. When the excruciating pain was over, it was followed by a comfortable feeling that made people feel as if they were floating in the air. Qinchuan's body, which had suffered a huge impact, began to recover at this time. In the blink of an eye, he recovered, and Qinchuan's aura was also 30% stronger than before. Qinchuan knew in his heart that only by enduring the power riot caused by the immortal tribulation force could he usher in the sweet rain after the riot. If he could not endure it, he would die. However, this was just the beginning. According to Qinchuan's inference, there should be 8 more immortal tribulations waiting for him after this. When the second immortal tribulation, about 2 meters in diameter, shot toward Qinchuan like a cannonball, Qinchuan tried to weaken the destructive power of the immortal tribulation with the lightning law. However, to Qinchuan's surprise, the lightning law's weakening of the destructive power of the immortal tribulation was extremely weak. It only weakened it by about 3%. Rumble! The lightning exploded, and the immortal tribulation force once again triggered a riot of power in Qinchuan's body. It swept through Qinchuan's body like a storm, and everywhere it passed, it was a mess. Chapter 1295. In the distance, Fidect and the other two were watching Qinchuan's tribulation with uncertain expressions. As a member of the Void race, Fidect wouldn't experience tribulation when he was advancing. Thus, he had only heard of the might of the immortal tribulation. It was his first time seeing it with his own eyes. He couldn't help but feel curious as he looked at the huge white ball of lightning condensing above the tribulation cloud. Is the might of the immortal tribulation triggered by everyone so astonishing? Hearing Fidec's words, Forio and Guru's expressions changed slightly. Neither of them answered Fidec's question. From Forio and Guru's silence, Fidect realized something and immediately asked, "What was the situation when you were undergoing tribulation?" Facing Fidec's question, Forio's expression was somewhat unsightly. He was silent for a while before answering. When I was undergoing tribulation, the ball of lightning condensed was only the size of a soccer ball. Hearing Forio's answer, Fidect couldn't help but stare blankly. He was quite familiar with soccer, which was a relatively popular sport in the universe. Even the first ball of lightning condensed by Qinchuan's tribulation had a diameter of about 1 meter, while Forio's was only the size of a soccer ball. The difference was a bit too great. On the other side, Guru clenched his teeth and said, "Mine was also the size of a soccer ball." Hearing this, Fidect immediately realized that perhaps Forio and Guru's situation was normal, but Qinchuan's was abnormal. It is said that the greater a person's potential, the bigger the ball of lightning condensed when triggering tribulation. Guru's gaze was extremely gloomy as he looked at the tribulation cloud in the distance and said in a deep voice, "Qinchuan's ball of lightning is so huge. Its potential is at least 10 times greater than ours." Furio's tone was extremely gloomy as he said, "In other words, Qinchuan has a higher chance of becoming an ultimate existence than us." Hearing Furio's words, Fidek's expression suddenly changed. Although he knew long ago that Qinchuan was a person who couldn't be measured by common sense, the potential that Qinchuan was currently displaying still shocked him. How terrifying was someone who had a high chance of becoming an ultimate existence? He must die. Fidertic made the decision without hesitation. As soon as the immortal tribulation ended, they would immediately attack and kill Qinchuan. In fact, even without Fidek's reminder, Furio and Guru had the same thought. If they couldn't kill Qinchuan now, they would never have such an opportunity in the future. As time passed, Qinchuan had already passed 5 immortal tribulations. After each immortal tribulation, the power of the new immortal tribulation would multiply. The diameter of the thunder ball had increased from the initial 1 meter to the current 10 meters. At this moment, above the tribulation clouds, the 6th tribulation had already condensed. The diameter of the lightning ball was no less than 15 meters. Even with the strength of Fidect and the others, the terrifying pressure caused their hearts to palpitate. If they were the ones facing the 6th immortal tribulation, even if they didn't die, they would be severely injured. This is already the 6th immortal tribulation. It seems that this is not his limit. Furio said in a deep voice, "In the past, I heard that Qinchuan's immortal tribulations were all 9 heavenly tribulations. Could it be that this immortal tribulation also has 9 immortal tribulations?" All along, Furio had been known as the person with the most talent under the Demon King. However, he only had 6 immortal tribulations. Even the Demon King only had 7 immortal tribulations. It's not just the Thunder Tribulation. Qinchuan's immortal tribulations also have 9 immortal tribulations. If he's old enough to trigger the Heavenly Tribulation, I'm sure the Heavenly Tribulation will also have 9 immortal tribulations. Guru's gaze was extremely cold as he looked at the tribulation clouds in the distance. The more outstanding and powerful Qinchuan's performance was, the more he couldn't allow Qinchuan to continue living. When the 6th immortal tribulation shot toward Qinchuan, as expected, the tribulation clouds began to condense the 7th immortal tribulation. Qinchuan's aura also began to increase. It actually made Furio feel that Qinchuan's aura was already on par with his. After Qinchuan completely passed the immortal tribulation, his aura would probably be far more powerful than his. When he thought of this, Furio actually felt a trace of retreating. He was actually a little scared. When Furio realized that a trace of reverence had appeared in his heart for Qinchuan, his face quickly turned ashen. He wasn't willing to admit all of this. Just as Furio was struggling in his heart, Guru suddenly transmitted his voice to Furio and said in a low voice, "Furio, Qinchuan is probably not easy to deal with." When he heard Guru's transmission, Furio coldly replied, "I know." Of course Furio knew that Qinchuan wasn't easy to deal with. If Qinchuan was easy to deal with, he wouldn't have lived until now. He also wouldn't have made the 3 of them attach so much importance to him and come together. Furio even felt a trace of retreating in his heart. If we can kill Qinchuan, we'll go all out. If we can't, we'll leave and leave Frederick behind to stop Qinchuan. After muttering to himself for a moment, Guru told Furio his plan. Although the 3 of them were in an alliance, if they were to talk about closeness, Zerg and the demon race were clearly closer. No matter what, Frederick belonged to another universe. It was easier for them to accept betraying him. When he heard Guru's words, Furio asked, "You think that even if the 3 of us join hands, we won't be Qinchuan's match?" When he said this, Furio discovered that he didn't feel much surprise in his heart. It turned out that unknowingly, he had tacitly agreed to this matter. It was just that he found it hard to accept for a moment. I only have this guess. Everything will only be known after Qin Chuan crosses the immortal tribulation and fights with him. Guru secretly glanced at Frederick, then said to Furio, "As far as I know, another second-rank expert has already arrived in the Void Empire. However, Frederick didn't tell us about this matter. Instead, he chose to hide it." When he heard this, Furio's expression changed slightly. He said in a deep voice, "I understand. We'll do as you say." While Furio and Guru were communicating, Qin Chuan had already crossed the seventh immortal tribulation. At this moment, he had already ushered in the eighth immortal tribulation. As the immortal tribulation became stronger and stronger, Qin Chuan's aura also became stronger and stronger. Now, it wasn't just Furio who felt reverence for Qin Chuan. Even Guru and Frederick were trembling with fear. After Qin Chuan crosses the immortal tribulation, his strength might immediately surpass theirs. "Brothers, we might only have one chance to make a move." Frederick looked at the ninth immortal tribulation gathering in the tribulation clouds and said in a deep voice, "When the tribulation clouds dissipate, the three of us will go all out. We must not hold back. If we can't kill Qin Chuan with this attack, I'm afraid our situation will be very dangerous." Chapter 1296. When Furio and Guru heard Frederick's words, they felt extremely conflicted. Before coming here, they never thought that they would actually face such a dilemma. If they left now, they wouldn't encounter any danger, but they would miss out on a chance to kill Qin Chuan. But if they didn't leave and continued to wait for Qin Chuan to pass the immortal tribulation, then they wouldn't be able to kill Qin Chuan immediately. Instead, they would have to face Qin Chuan's counterattack. No one knew how terrifying Qin Chuan's counterattack would be. To be honest, before coming here, I never thought that there would actually be so many changes in our thinking. Furio sighed. At first, they thought that as long as they were serious, killing Qin Chuan would only be a matter of waving their hands. But now they felt that even if the three of them joined forces and attacked with all their strength, they might not be able to kill Qin Chuan. This change was huge, and at the same time, it also made their hearts heavy and conflicted. "There's no point in saying this now. We'd better make our preparations," Guru quietly hinted to Furio. He and Furio had already made a decision. After attacking with all their strength, regardless of whether Qin Chuan was dead or alive, they would immediately flee far away without any hesitation. As for what Frederick would do, that wasn't within their scope of consideration. Rumble. After nearly an hour, Qin Chuan's immortal tribulation finally reached its final critical moment. The ninth lightning ball with a diameter of 100 meters had already condensed. This last immortal tribulation gathered all the power in the tribulation clouds. Its might was so great that even a supreme existence of the tribulation stage might not be able to withstand it. Seeing how terrifying the might of the last immortal tribulation was, Frederick and the other two couldn't help but place their hopes of killing Qin Chuan on this ninth immortal tribulation. If Qin Chuan died under the immortal tribulation, they would be too happy. Qin Chuan raised his head to look at the ninth immortal tribulation in the sky. He watched as the huge lightning ball slowly rotated. The dark tribulation clouds also rotated along with it, like a black whirlwind, setting off a vast momentum. 1. The last immortal tribulation finally moved. Like a cannonball, it shot towards Qin Chuan. Although it didn't seem to be very fast, the pressure it emitted made Frederick and the other two who were watching from afar feel suffocated. As for Qin Chuan, who was facing the immortal tribulation, his expression was incomparably solemn. Life or death, it all depended on this moment. When the thunderball fell from the sky and pressed down on Qin Chuan's body, it was as if his body had been struck by a giant hammer. He was pressed into the ground by a powerful force. The solid ground cracked and dense cracks spread out in all directions like a spider web. Qinchuan's body was on the verge of collapse. The extreme pain caused Qinchuan's expression to become incomparably ferocious and his veins to bulge. A white light suddenly invaded the entire world, causing the dark universe to suddenly turn into a snow-white world. Endless lightning flew in all directions like snowflakes. The extreme destructive power turned everything it touched into nothingness. In order to avoid the fluctuations caused by the explosion of the immortal tribulation, the three of them had already retreated hundreds of thousands of miles away. They looked at the snow-white world of lightning in front of them and felt a great impact on their hearts. With such power, if they were in the center of the explosion, they would have been smashed into pieces. Is he still alive? Furo's voice was a little hoarse, and his expression was extremely complicated. If Qinchuan could survive such a powerful immortal tribulation and advance to the tribulation passing stage, then they might as well turn around and run for their lives. Whether it was Fidect or Guru, they had no way of answering Furo's question because they didn't know whether Qinchuan was still alive or not. If he was still alive, then Qinchuan could be considered to have passed the immortal tribulation and successfully advanced to the tribulation passing stage. When the white lightning gradually dissipated, the universe returned to its dark state. The Millstone continent reappeared in front of Fidect and the other two, but it was already on the verge of collapse. In the sky above the Millstone continent, a tall figure stood proudly. At this moment, Qinchuan had successfully passed the immortal tribulation and officially advanced to the tribulation passing stage, becoming the supreme existence in this universe. Qinchuan closed his eyes and silently felt the changes in the power in his body. The abundant immortal power caused Qinchuan's confidence to soar rapidly, giving him a feeling of invincibility. This is immortal power. Is this the strength of supreme existences in the tribulation passing stage? Qinchuan murmured in a low voice. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at Fidect and the other two in the distance. Now, he wanted to use these three to test how strong he was. While Qinchuan was thinking about this, Fidect and the other two had already launched their strongest attack on Qinchuan according to their original plan. Furo opened his mouth and spat out a ball of pitch-black fog, which quickly enveloped Qinchuan. This pitch-black fog was formed by all the immortal power in Furo's body, and it was Furo's killing move. Guru suddenly turned into a huge white beetle. His 6 pairs of eyes all looked at Qinchuan and shot out rays of white light, which gathered in the air and turned into a ball of white light. Everywhere it passed, space was torn apart. Fidect condensed all the void power in his body and turned it into a dark purple diamond-like crystal the size of a thumb. He shot it at Qinchuan like a bullet. It looked ordinary, but it hid a great terror. Facing the all-out attack of Fidect and the other two, Qinchuan's expression was normal. He didn't even have any intention of dodging or defending. When the attack of Fidect and the other two was only 1,000 meters away from Qinchuan, Qinchuan slowly raised his hand and pointed his index finger in front of him. Freeze! Qinchuan casually spat out the word freeze, and the black fog, white ball of light, and dark purple crystal that were flying over stopped in unison. Countercurrent. When Qinchuan said the word countercurrent again, the black fog, white ball of light, and dark purple crystal suddenly smiled and turned into the purest immortal power. Qinchuan gently waved his hand, and the 3 masses of immortal power dispersed. In the distance, when Fidect saw this scene, his expression couldn't help but become incomparably frightened. He had thought about how Qinchuan would block their attack, but he never thought that Qinchuan would be so relaxed, even somewhat careless. How can he be so strong? Fidect couldn't believe it, but at this moment, no one could answer his question, because Furo and Guru had already turned around and fled. Chapter 1297. When Fidect sensed that Furo and Guru had already turned around and fled, his expression quickly turned ashen. He roared, "Bastards! He never thought that Furu and Guru would actually flee so decisively. The key point was that they didn't even tell him. Wasn't this treating him as cannon fodder? Do you still have the demeanor of supreme experts at the tribulation passing stage? Facing Fiderdic's roar, Furu and Guru acted as if they didn't hear it. Their escape speed didn't slow down at all. If they could only choose between survival and the demeanor of an expert, they would definitely choose survival. What was the use of demeanor when they were already dead? In the distance, Qinchuan looked at the scene in front of him and couldn't help but reveal a playful expression. In the past, whether it was facing Fiderdic or Furu, all he could do was cover his head and flee like a rat. Even blocking the opponent's attack depended on luck. But now, it was the other party who had to cover their heads and flee like a rat when facing him. This change in status made Qinchuan's mood very complicated. But no matter how complicated his mood was, he had to kill these people first and then slowly experience it. At this time, Fiderdic was already preparing to flee, but Qinchuan didn't intend to give Fiderdic this opportunity. Qinchuan raised his hand and the heavenly devil seal appeared in his hand. A wave of immortal power surged out from Qinchuan's body and entered the heavenly devil seal. Almost instantly, the heavenly devil seal's spirituality was restored to normal. After the heavenly devil seal's spirituality was restored, Qinchuan raised his hand and smashed the heavenly devil seal toward Fiderdic. Suppress. Under Qinchuan's control, the heavenly devil seal suddenly turned into the size of a planet and fell from the sky, smashing toward Fiderdic. Fiderdic sensed the pressure from the heavenly devil seal above his head, and his expression suddenly changed. With a low shout, his body suddenly turned into a dark purple mist and quickly flew out of the heavenly devil seal's range of suppression. Seeing that the light purple mist was about to escape from the heavenly devil seal's range of suppression, a transparent wall suddenly appeared in front of him. No matter how hard the light purple mist tried, it couldn't break through the transparent wall. The light purple mist once again turned into Fiderdic's appearance. He roared and bombarded the transparent wall in front of him with void power, but the transparent wall didn't move. Don't struggle. Unless your attainments in the law of space are greater than mine, you can forget about breaking through this seal. Qinchuan's SS appeared in the distance. He looked at Fiderdic's calmly looked at Fiderdic's as if he was a dead man's. Fiderdic suddenly turned around and looked at Qinchuan. His expression was extremely vigilant, and he was ready to counterattack. Qinchuan saw this and smiled slightly. I heard that the warriors of the Void Empire are very strong in close combat. I'll give you a chance now. Defeat me in close combat and I'll let you go. Hearing Qinchuan's words, Fiderdic didn't even ask if it was true. He directly pounced on Qinchuan because there was only one path in front of him, and that was to defeat Qinchuan. If he couldn't defeat Qinchuan, he could only wait for death. As a Grade 2 warrior, close combat had always been Fiderdic's specialty. If Qinchuan kept attacking him from a distance, he could only struggle in despair. But now that Qinchuan wanted to fight him in close combat, he saw the hope of defeating Qinchuan. You will pay a painful price for your confidence. Fiderdic closed in on Qinchuan. He raised his hand and punched. It was a simple punch, but it contained enough power to destroy heaven and earth. Bang! Fiderdic's extremely fast punch was blocked by Qinchuan's hand. Qinchuan's arm only trembled slightly, and he looked very relaxed. Seeing this scene, Fiderdic's expression changed slightly. The void energy lingering around his body suddenly turned into a dark purple battle armor. When Fiderdic punched again, the power was several times stronger than before. Previously, when Fiderdic and Saint Badaru were fighting, Qinchuan had seen Fiderdic's battle armor. When Fiderdic punched again, Qinchuan's face showed a touch of disappointment. He originally thought that the battle armor could increase Fiderdic's strength by a lot, but he didn't expect that it would only increase his strength by about 4 times. This time, Qin Chuan didn't continue to block by himself. Instead, he also punched. When Qin Chuan punched, fine golden dragon scales suddenly appeared on his right arm, exuding a mighty dragon's might. Duang! When Qin Chuan and Fidertic's fists collided, an extremely astonishing power rushed towards Qin Chuan. The fine dragon scales on Qin Chuan's right arm trembled slightly, dispersing the power. On the other hand, when Fidertic faced Qin Chuan's punch, cracks appeared on his right arm's battle armor. The cracks became bigger and bigger, and even spread to his whole body. Gotcha! The battle armor that Fidertic was so proud of, created with the power of the void, actually shattered under the might of Qin Chuan's punch. Fidertic couldn't believe it. He thought that he would lose to Qin Chuan, but he didn't expect that he couldn't even take a single punch from Qin Chuan. Although I'm in human form now, the power I erupt with is the power of a dragon. You're not my opponent at all. Qin Chuan looked at Fidertic with a subtle gaze and said indifferently, "The battle ends here. Goodbye." Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Fidertic subconsciously wanted to struggle. He no longer held back and displayed his full strength. Void! Fidertic roared and his body shattered. Deep purple blood gushed out from Fideric's shattered body, and under the influence of the power of the void, he turned into a bloody humanoid monster. Seeing this scene, Qin Chuan couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. When he fought with Arsene in Tron Nebula, Arsene had also turned into a similar appearance in a desperate situation and called himself a blood spirit. However, compared to Arsene at that time, the blood spirit that Fidertic turned into was much more powerful. Whoosh! Fidertic, who had turned into a blood spirit, flickered and appeared behind Qin Chuan in an instant. His bloody palm turned into a sharp thorn and accurately pierced towards Qin Chuan's back. Roar! Suddenly, Qin Chuan's figure disappeared, and a 1,000-meter-long golden dragon appeared in the universe. Fidertic's fatal attack pierced the dragon scales on the dragon's body. Although it left a deep mark on the dragon's scales, it failed to pierce through the dragon's scales. Just as Fidertic wanted to continue attacking, Qin Chuan, who had turned into a golden dragon, no longer gave Fidertic a chance. He opened his mouth and spat out a blazing golden dragon breath that instantly enveloped Fidertic. Chapter 1298. Under the burning of the golden dragon's breath, Fidertic let out an ear-piercing scream. Qin Chuan returned to his human form. He looked indifferently at Fidertic, who was burned by the raging flames and pierced by the golden lightning. There was no pity in his eyes. Fidertic deserved all of this. Qin Chuan, you are not invincible. If not for those two idiots escaping, you would not have been our match. At this moment, the void energy protecting Fideric's body was becoming thinner and thinner. He knew that he did not have long to live, but he also knew that he did not lose to Qin Chuan, but to Furu and Guru, his two pig-like teammates. Qin Chuan seemed powerful, but in reality, he was not powerful enough to kill them. If Furu and Guru had not escaped, the three of them would have had at least a 60% chance of winning if they had joined forces to fight Qin Chuan. However, Furu and Guru had escaped. Therefore, Fideric's heart was filled with hatred and despair. When Qin Chuan heard Fideric's roar, he smiled and said, "You are right, but unfortunately, there are no ifs in this world." As Qin Chuan finished speaking, the void energy protecting Fideric's body finally collapsed. When the dragon's breath invaded Fideric's blood spirit body, Fideric's aura quickly withered and then completely dissipated. The commander of the Void Empire's expeditionary army, Fidertic, had fallen. In the distance, Furu and Guru did not know the extent of the battle between Qin Chuan and Fidertic. They wanted to know the progress of the battle, but they did not dare to stop. Qin Chuan has not caught up after so long. Furu looked at Guru and said, "Could it be that Fidertic blocked him?" Guru's expression was somewhat gloomy. He did not answer Fura's question because he was thinking about a problem. He seemed to have made a wrong decision. Seeing that Guru did not speak, Furo's expression changed slightly. Could it be that Qinchuan is not as strong as we thought? Was he just bluffing? Hearing Fura's words, Guru said in a deep voice. He only raised his hand and stopped the attacks of the three of us at the same time, turning them into useless efforts. How could this be a bluff? Fu frowned and said, maybe he only has one chance. Guru sneered and said, then you can go back and kill him now. Don't you want to kill him? The opportunity is right in front of you. Hearing Guru's words, Fro finally stopped talking. Even though he knew that Qinchuan was just bluffing and was just a paper tiger that could be broken with a single poke, he could not turn back. 1. Right at this moment, a spatial door opened up at a spot that was only 25,000 kilometers away from Furo and Guru. Qinchuan's figure flashed out from within it, and then he entered another spatial door. When he appeared again, he was only 500 kilometers behind Furo and Guru. The moment Qinchuan's figure appeared, Furu and Guru's expressions changed abruptly. Qinchuan had actually caught up so quickly. Did this not mean that Fidect was already dead? Just as Furu and Guru were thinking about this, Qinchuan's voice came from behind them. It was indifferent and emotionless. Stop. You can't run away. Hearing Qinchuan's words, Furu and Guru looked at each other and saw the fear in each other's eyes. However, they were not afraid of Qinchuan, but each other. Let's split up and run. We can't split up. We'll be defeated one by one. Guru suggested that they split up and run away, but Furu did not think so. If they split up, Qinchuan might only be able to chase after one of them. The other might have a chance of escaping, but it was more likely that they would be defeated one by Qinchuan. If they did not split up and were forced into a corner, they could still try to join forces to fight back. They might be able to defeat Qinchuan. Guru was a little hesitant. What Furu said was very reasonable, but whether it was Fidect or Furu, they had both attacked Qinchuan before. If they split up and ran away, Qinchuan would most likely chase after Furu first. Guru only needed to find a place to hide, and he might be able to escape Qinchuan's pursuit. However, Guru's idea was very good. He had forgotten that in this universe, the one Qinchuan hated the most would always be Zerg. Just as Furu and Guru were weighing the pros and cons, a realm portal suddenly appeared in front of them. Qinchuan slowly walked out from it and said to the two of them, "Have you thought it through? Are you going to split up or join forces?" Looking at Qinchuan, who suddenly appeared in front of them and blocked their way, Furu and Guru almost subconsciously chose to split up and run away. Looking at this scene, Qinchuan could not help but reveal a cold smile on his face. These so-called three leaders of the demon faction had never thought of working together in the face of danger. Such a so-called alliance was like a handful of sand that would collapse on its own sooner or later. As the commander-in-chief of the endless allied army, Qinchuan had the obligation to eliminate the enemies for the endless allied army. However, on the way to eliminating the enemies, it was also reasonable to eliminate the people he hated along the way. Therefore, Qinchuan locked onto Guru as his first target. When Guru saw Qinchuan turn around and chase after him, his expression could be said to be extremely gloomy. If he had expected something like this to happen, he would have run away with Furu. That way, they could have looked after each other. But it was a little too late to say all this now. It was absolutely impossible for him to expect Furu to turn around and help him. Why me? Before the battle began, Guru wanted to ask Qinchuan why he did not chase after Furu, whom he had met once before, but chose him instead. Hearing this, Qinchuan glanced at Guru indifferently and said, "Because I hate Zerg." Hearing Qinchuan's words, Guru suddenly recalled that Qinchuan was a human who had walked out of the banished land. He was a human who had been persecuted by Zerg many times. It was no wonder that Qin Chuan would choose him as his primary target. However, if Qin Chuan thought that he could kill him as long as he caught up to him, then he was underestimating him too much. Zerg storm! Guru roared angrily. Fine white dots of light suddenly appeared in the universe, and each of these hundreds of millions of tiny dots of light was a beetle. When these beetles gathered together, they turned into a white storm that swept towards Qin Chuan. Guru did not expect this Zerg storm to be able to repel Qin Chuan. He only needed the Zerg storm to buy him enough time. However, facing the Zerg storm, Qin Chuan had no intention of attacking. He was prepared to give the Zerg storm to Little Armored Dragon and let it have a good meal. Chapter 1299. The moment the Little Armored Dragon appeared, its eyes were fixed on the white storm that was sweeping over. In the face of this incomparably tempting meal, the Little Armored Dragon suddenly opened its mouth, and an extremely powerful suction force burst out from its mouth. Like a whale swallowing, it sucked all the white storm into its stomach. Burp! The Little Armored Dragon gave a beautiful burp, and then looked at Guru, who was running for his life, somewhat unsatisfied. This white storm was much easier to digest than the immortal power from before. When Guru saw that the white storm he originally planned to use to stall for time was actually swallowed by the Little Armored Dragon, his expression suddenly became extremely ugly. Previously, it was because the Little Armored Dragon stopped him that he could not kill Qin Chuan before Qin Chuan triggered the immortal tribulation. He did not expect the Little Armored Dragon to jump out now. It's really difficult to deal with. Guru snorted coldly. He did not use any other means to stall for time, and only sped up his escape. Qin Chuan followed behind Guru unhurriedly, like a cat catching a mouse. It seemed that he did not take Guru seriously at all. Qin Chuan's attitude made Guru extremely surprised. The less serious Qin Chuan was, the greater the chance of him escaping alive. It was not until Guru's head hit a transparent wall that he vaguely realized that Qin Chuan was not doing nothing. I was building a cage, so I did not make a move. What about you? Why did you not make a move? Qin Chuan looked at Guru with cold eyes and expressionless face. Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Guru was angry and said in a deep voice, "Fadertik and Fro have both tried to kill you. We have only met for the first time. Do you really want to kill me?" Qin Chuan sneered. "If I had not advanced to the tribulation stage, would you have let me go?" Buzz. Just as Qin Chuan was speaking, a sharp buzzing sound suddenly rang out in his ears. He didn't know when, but a white beetle the size of a grain of rice had suddenly appeared beside his ear and drilled straight into it. When Qin Chuan sensed the danger, a space portal the size of a fingernail instantly appeared in his ear. The white beetle was caught off guard and went straight into the space portal, disappearing in an instant. Seeing this scene, Guru could not help but frown slightly. He had said so much nonsense to Qin Chuan in order to distract Qin Chuan and create an opportunity for the white beetle's sneak attack. He did not expect it to fail. "I should have guessed that you never wanted to be kind from the start." Qin Chuan looked coldly at Guru. He took out the Heavenly Demon Seal and suppressed Guru. Facing the suppression of the Heavenly Demon Seal, which was infinitely close to a divine artifact, Guru immediately took out a hexagonal shell above his head and blocked the Heavenly Demon Seal that was falling from the sky. Immediately, a giant dragon phantom and a human phantom flew out of the Heavenly Demon Seal and attacked Guru from both sides. Guru immediately raised his hand and released hundreds of millions of white beetles. They divided into two groups and blocked the giant dragon phantom and the human phantom respectively. Just as Guru finished doing all this, Qin Chuan's figure suddenly moved. A golden long sword materialized from immortal power appeared in his hand. The long sword flew out of his hand and turned into a golden flowing light, slashing toward Guru. "You can't kill me!" Guru shouted in a low voice. He also used immortal power to materialize a palm-sized white beetle in front of him. This beetle looked as round as jade and was crystal clear. However, the aura it emitted was extremely evil and strange, which did not match its appearance. The white beetle formed from immortal power hissed and rushed toward the golden long sword. In the face of the incomparably sharp blade, it used its slender legs to block it. However, to everyone's surprise, the white beetle blocked the sword. Seeing this scene, Qinchuan frowned slightly, but Guru laughed complacently. "You're not the only one who has a top-grade divine artifact. This white beetle of mine is called Bailuo. I carefully cultivated it for 3,000 years. It's the king of beetles selected from tens of billions of beetles of the same species. Its body is indestructible, and at the same time, it has extremely terrifying killing power. Even if I die, it won't die. Instead, it will target the enemy who killed me and will only die after avenging me." When Qinchuan heard Guru's words, he could not help but reveal a look of surprise. He did not expect this beetle named Bailuo to be so rare. It was no wonder that Guru had the confidence to block the sword. However, Qinchuan did not believe Guru's words of indestructibility. He never believed that there was something in this world that could not be destroyed. Even if there was, it was only because he had not encountered something that could destroy it for the time being. "You can block one sword, but I don't know if you can block 10, 100, or even 1,000 swords," Qinchuan shouted in a low voice. The immortal power in his body surged, and thousands of golden swords appeared around him. With the current amount of immortal power in Qinchuan's body, this was already the limit of what he could do. When Guru saw this scene, he could not help but reveal a look of shock. He cried out involuntarily, "How is this possible? You've only just entered the crossing calamity stage. How can you have such rich immortal power?" Guru could not figure it out, but he no longer had the time to think about these questions because the thousands of immortal swords had already fallen like a rain of swords. Although Bailuo was powerful, she could only block a dozen or so swords in an instant at most. Against this rain of swords that numbered in the thousands, her usefulness was next to nothing. Therefore, Guru gritted his teeth and made a decision. He completely abandoned Bailuo's defense and controlled Bailuo to directly attack Qinchuan. Bailuo's speed was extremely fast. It brushed past the rain of swords and crossed thousands of miles in the blink of an eye, arriving in front of Qinchuan and biting toward Qinchuan's neck. However, right at this moment, a dazzling golden figure blocked in front of Qinchuan. It was precisely the fiendish little armored dragon. Guru said that Bailuo was indestructible, but Qinchuan wanted to let the little armored dragon have a try. He wanted to see if Bailuo was hard enough or if the little armored dragon's teeth were good enough. Smack! The little armored dragon waved its chubby little hand and slapped Bailuo's head. It suddenly grabbed Bailuo and opened its mouth to bite Bailuo's head. With this bite, the little armored dragon's teeth only left a small bite mark on Bailuo's body. However, the little armored dragon did not give up. It hugged Bailuo with both hands and began to bite. On the other side, Guru had already used his king of sacred armor to protect himself and began to resist the attacks of the rain of swords with difficulty. The battle between Bailuo and the little armored dragon made Guru's heart sink to the bottom. Chapter 1300. Qinchuan couldn't help but reveal a look of disdain when he saw the little armored dragon gnawing on Bailuo. This little armored dragon is too careless with its food. It actually covered Bailuo's body with its saliva. It looks disgusting. Although Qinchuan said it was disgusting, his observation was still very meticulous. He discovered that Bailuo's insect body actually showed signs of softening under the little armored dragon's mouth. After softening to a certain extent, the little armored dragon finally gnawed off a piece of jelly-like flesh from Bailuo's body. Gulp! The little armored dragon swallowed the piece of meat in one bite. With a satisfied look on its face, it began a new round of gnawing. At this moment, Guru suddenly roared in pain in the distance, as if the little armored dragon's bite wasn't on Bai Luo's body, but on him. In fact, Guru and Bai Luo had a symbiotic relationship. If Guru died one day, his will would parasitize Bai Luo's body. As long as Bai Luo didn't die, his will wouldn't be extinguished. This was a secret that no one knew. Guru previously said that Bai Luo would die after killing his enemy, but that was also a lie. However, whether those things were true or false no longer mattered because Bai Luo couldn't live anymore. Although Guru wouldn't fall with Bai Luo's death, he and Bai Luo had an extremely close spiritual connection. Bai Luo's death would still cause him great harm. However, the little armored dragon didn't care about this. Bai Luo was a rare tonic for the little armored dragon. It had encountered one with great difficulty, so it definitely had to eat it all. When Qinchuan saw that Bai Luo had completely lost her threat and had become a snack in the little armored dragon's hands, he no longer paid attention to Bai Luo. Instead, he looked at Guru. He looked at the golden armor on Guru's body and couldn't help but think of the sacred monarch armor. He originally thought that it was a skill unique to the little armored dragon, but now it seemed that every sacred monarch armor should have such a skill. But from the looks of it, the defensive capabilities of Guru's battle armor were much weaker and wouldn't be able to hold on for long under the rain of swords. What Qinchuan could see, Guru naturally knew as well. He was unwilling to sit still and wait for his death. He transformed into his true form, a huge white beetle. He opened his ferocious mouth and spat out a ball of white mucus at the oncoming rain of swords. When the sword rain came into contact with the mucus, it stopped uncontrollably. Then, it was melted by the mucus and dissipated into immortal power. However, as the dozens of sword blades were defeated, the sticky liquid lost its power and fell down. Puff, puff. Guru spat out a series of mucus, forming a line of defense in front of him. He wanted to block the attack of the sword rain. However, Qinchuan fused all the sword rain together. With the support of the god's sword intent, the fused sword blade pierced through the line of defense formed by the mucus and directly pierced Guru's head. Crack! The sword blade was stuck in the carapace on Guru's head. Faint white blood flowed out. The sword intent invaded Guru's brain through this small wound. If Guru hadn't reacted quickly and wrapped the sword intent with immortal power in time and sent it out of his body, he would have been dead by now. However, before Guru could breathe a sigh of relief, Qinchuan's new round of attack came. The space around Guru's body froze inch by inch, imprisoning Guru in a cramped space. He was almost unable to move. And this was not the end. As more and more space was frozen, even Guru's body became a part of it. If Guru couldn't escape from this space, he would be frozen sooner or later. However, Guru's attainments in the law of space were inferior to Qinchuan's. It was almost impossible for him to break free from this cage. Guru used all his methods, even using all his immortal power to attack the frozen space. However, even if he shattered a part of the space, Qinchuan would soon repair the shattered space, not giving Guru a chance to escape. At this moment, Guru was in complete despair. "Let me go. I'm willing to be loyal to you. I'm sure you know how precious a crossing calamity stage servant is." In this desperate situation, Guru had already given up his dignity in order to survive. He was willing to be loyal to Qinchuan and live on as a slave. Under the terrifying shadow of death, the tribulation stage supreme existence was cowardly, no different from ordinary people. However, Qinchuan didn't give Guru this chance at all. Qinchuan would never be merciful to Zerg. Of course, Little Armored Dragon was an exception. Finally, in Guru's desperate and angry roar, the entire space with Guru's body as the center completely froze. From the outer shell to the inner organs, nothing was spared. Qinchuan gently snapped his fingers, and the frozen space shattered inch by inch. A huge black hole appeared in the universe. When Qinchuan waved his hand, the black hole was smoothed out, and everything returned to normal. Guru was dead. His death was silent. After dealing with Guru, Qinchuan didn't immediately chase after Foryo. He had just advanced to the tribulation stage. Although his strength had soared and there was a qualitative change, he was not a tireless machine. After the battle with Frederick and Guru, he inevitably felt a little tired. If he wanted to chase after Foryo, he would have to wait until he had rested. Qinchuan sat cross-legged in the void and silently began to rest. At the same time, he used the experience of these two battles to summarize the progress and changes in his strength. If nothing unexpected happens, my attainments in the law of space have become even more powerful. It's not an exaggeration to say that with my current strength, if I want to freeze space, even a tribulation stage supreme existence would find it difficult to escape. As for the law of time, there aren't any particularly big changes. I think it's because of Yu's existence that my progress in the law of time has become extremely slow. However, based on the current situation, it should be enough. The most important change is in the talisman arrays. I didn't have time to use them in the previous battle. Perhaps the talisman arrays I have mastered are the only 9th-level talisman arrays after you left this universe. If such a talisman array appears on the battlefield, it will be the end of the enemy. In the past, although Qinchuan's mental force had advanced to the spirit condensation stage and became incomparably powerful, Qinchuan's use of mental force had not become very profound. However, it was different now. As he advanced to the tribulation stage, the talisman arrays he mastered had also evolved into 9th-level talisman arrays. Now, with his strength alone, he was able to fight against tens of billions of troops on the battlefield. It was not an exaggeration to describe the power of 9th-level talisman arrays as a meat grinder on the battlefield. Chapter 1301. When Qinchuan began to rest and reorganize on the spot, Fro had already left the Dark Universe and returned to the Deus Cluster. As soon as he returned to the Deus Cluster, Fro contacted the Nephilim army in the Audon Nebula and immediately ordered the army to retreat to the Devil's Star. The frontline commander was very puzzled by Fro's order. At this time, the front line was at war. A sudden retreat would have a great impact on the war situation. However, Fro's explanation was extremely simple and crude. If you don't want to die, then retreat. If you want to die, then stay. Hearing Fro's words, the frontline commander finally realized the seriousness of the matter. He immediately ordered the army that was attacking the Iron Chain Galaxy to retreat to the Devil's Star. When the Nephilim army retreated from the battlefield in the Iron Chain Galaxy, it attracted the attention of many parties. Zerg and the Void Empire immediately called the Nephilim Command Center to ask why the Nephilim army retreated. However, the frontline commander of the Nephilim army had no intention of explaining and simply left. The Nephilim army's retreat also surprised the Endless Allied army. However, no matter why the Nephilim army retreated, it was a good thing for them. Soon, the Void Empire and Zerg's army also retreated. Because of the sudden retreat of the Nephilim army, they were extremely angry and immediately reported this matter to Federic and Guru. However, what made the frontline commander feel uneasy was that they did not receive any response after sending out the message. However, they never thought that Federic and Guru would encounter misfortune. This was because they did not believe that in this universe, there was anyone who could threaten the safety of Federic and Guru without the help of an ultimate existence. On the other hand, the Endless Allied army immediately held a high-level meeting after the war stopped. Chen Chongqing sat next to the empty seat of the commander-in-chief. He faced everyone and said, "The sudden retreat of the Nephilim army caused the Void Empire and Zerg to have no choice but to retreat. This behavior is very strange. Do you have any clues?" Facing Chen Chongqing's question, everyone shook their heads. Before this, they had never thought that such a thing would happen. Everyone was confused. Seeing everyone shaking their heads, Chun Chongqing frowned and said, "It seems that something has happened that is beyond our control. However, what happened?" Tian San looked at Chun Chongqing and asked, "Could there be an internal problem in the demon faction?" "That's unlikely." Chun Chongqing thought for a moment and then answered, "For the demon faction now, nothing is more important than defeating us. Before we are defeated, even if there is any conflict between them, it will be temporarily suppressed and will not erupt." Everyone nodded in agreement after hearing Chun Chongqing's words. Although it was definitely a good thing for them to have internal conflicts in the demon faction, the probability of such a thing happening was too small. They could only think about it. Seeing that no one had any ideas for the time being, Lu Zi, who was sitting on the side, suddenly said, "If everyone doesn't know what happened, then I guess Qin Shui must have done something." When everyone heard Lu Zi's words, they were slightly stunned. This matter was related to Qin Chuan? When Tian San heard this, he immediately said, "I also think that it is possible. Qin Shui has always been good at creating miracles. Everyone knows this." The demon army suddenly retreated. Perhaps Qin Shui had advanced to the tribulation stage and then killed Forio. When everyone heard Tian San's words, their expressions suddenly became strange. Although everyone knew that Qin Chuan had secretly gone somewhere to try to advance to the tribulation stage and might have succeeded, even if Qin Chuan had advanced to the tribulation stage, it was not possible for him to kill the famous Forio. Someone immediately said to Tian San, "Elder Tian San, although I also think that Qin Shui might have done something, our thoughts can be more realistic. For example, Qin Shui once again attacked the demon planet and cut off the demon army's supply line." Obviously, the person who spoke did not think that Qin Chuan had the ability to kill Forio. Chun Chongqing lightly knocked on the table and said to everyone, "Everyone, let's not speculate about this matter for now. Let the intelligence personnel pay close attention to the movement of the demon faction, and then urgently repair the fortifications. Everyone must persist until Qin Shui returns." When everyone heard Chun Chongqing, their expression became somewhat subtle. This time, if not for the sudden retreat of the demon army, perhaps they would not have been able to hold on. Now that they had a chance to take a breather, they could persist for a period of time. But who knew when Qin Chuan would return? Just when Chun Chongqing was preparing to adjourn the meeting, Yaorao, who was in charge of intelligence work, suddenly stood up, and somewhat excitedly said to everyone, "Everyone, the intelligence personnel we have placed in Deus Cluster sent a message. He encountered Forio in the universe, and Forio seems to be running for his life." Running for his life? Everyone looked at Yaorao in astonishment. If Forio was running for his life, then who was chasing after him? Could it really be Qin Chuan? "Are you sure?" Someone frowned and asked, "It really is Forio, is he really running for his life?" Yaorao nodded and said, "The intelligence personnel are currently chasing after Forio, but Forio's speed is very fast, and the spaceship he is riding on is somewhat unable to catch up. Therefore, he launched a tracking projectile, and the signal has already been transmitted back. Now we can release the video to understand the details." "Release the video immediately." Chun Chongqing immediately ordered to release the video captured by the tracking projectile. Everyone looked at the crystal screen on the wall, and they saw a figure shrouded in black fog flying rapidly towards the direction of the Devil Planet. Through the black fog, everyone could faintly see Forio's gloomy and unsightly face. It really is Forio, but who is chasing after him? Chun Chongqing was somewhat excited. He had already thought of a certain possibility, but he also felt that it was too inconceivable. In fact, not only Chun Chongqing thought of a certain possibility, everyone present thought of this possibility, but was it really possible? "What is that?" Suddenly, someone pointed at the crystal screen. In the corner of the video captured by the tracking projectile, a pitch-black space portal opened, and a tall figure slowly walked out from it. This familiar figure, this iconic space travel technique, everyone who was familiar with Qin Chuan instantly recognized him. The person who walked out from the space portal was precisely Qin Chuan. Looking at the direction, the place where Qin Chuan appeared was not far behind Forio. In other words, the person chasing after Forio was Qin Chuan? Chapter 1302. Qin Chuan was chasing after Fro. When everyone in the conference room realized this, they were all dumbfounded. Even Pope Baudelaire, who had high hopes for Qin Chuan, was shocked. Is Marshal Qin really chasing after Fro? Is it just on the way? Someone asked in a weak voice. In any case, they found it hard to accept the fact that Qin Chuan was chasing after Fro. On the way? Let's not talk about why Marshal Qin is going in the direction of the Devil Star. If you were Fro, would you turn a blind eye to Marshal Qin behind you? Someone immediately retorted. Qin Chuan and Fro were so close that it was impossible for Fro not to have discovered Qin Chuan. However, Fro was still running for his life even after discovering Qin Chuan. This could only mean one thing: Fro was not Qin Chuan's opponent and was being chased by Qin Chuan. This is crazy. It was unknown who exclaimed, but it was what everyone present was thinking. Not long ago, they were still worried about the lack of top fighting strength. But in less than a month, Qin Chuan, as the commander of the endless allied forces, was already chasing Fro all over the world. Other than the word crazy, they really could not think of a better word to describe it. It is indeed crazy. Tian San took a deep breath and digested this reality with great difficulty. He then turned his head to look at Baudelaire and asked, "Pope, how is your strength compared to Fro?" Hearing Tian San's question, everyone turned their heads to look at Baudelaire. If there was anyone present who was qualified to comment on this matter, it would definitely be Baudelaire. Facing everyone's gazes, Baudelaire pursed his lips and said, "I am not as good as Fro." When everyone heard Baudelaire's answer and looked at Qin Chuan on the crystal screen, their mood suddenly became somewhat complicated. Saint Baudelaire sighed and said, "If I were to face Fro, I would only have 30% chance of winning, and 50% chance of blocking Fro's attack, and not being defeated. But if you want me to chase after Forio, unless Forio is seriously injured and can't even use 40% of his strength, I don't have the confidence to kill him." When everyone heard Saint Baudelaire's words, they once again looked at the crystal screen. However, at this time, the homing projectiles had already lost their targets, Fu and Qin Chuan. All they could see was the vast universe. I remember that Fro's condition wasn't bad. Indeed, his clothes are clean and tidy. This means that he has not experienced any battle. If Qin Shui can chase after Forio while his strength is still intact, doesn't that mean that Qin Shui's strength has far surpassed Forio's and can even crush him? Everyone looked at each other and felt that their brains weren't working properly. How did Qin Chuan become so powerful in less than a month's time? But no matter what, this was a good thing for their endless allied forces. I tried to contact Qin Shui, but he didn't respond. Lu Zi glanced at everyone and said, "Maybe Qin Shui will take the initiative to contact us after the pursuit of Forio comes to an end." Everyone nodded. At this time, they felt as if they had just finished an exam and were waiting for the result. They were incomparably nervous and excited. Qin Chuan discovered the homing projectiles very early on. Originally, he wanted to casually destroy them, but after discovering that the serial number of the homing projectiles belonged to the endless allied forces, he gave up on this plan. He knew that many people in the endless allied forces must be full of doubts at this time. After dealing with Forio, he would naturally clear up everyone's doubts. At this time, Forio really wished that he could use all his strength to escape. Seeing Qin Chuan closing the distance between them with the space travel technique again and again but not immediately launching an attack, Forio's mood was incomparably tormented. He would rather have Qin Chuan immediately catch up and fight with him than continue this boring game of cat and mouse. However, he did not have the courage to take the initiative to stop and fight Qin Chuan. Previously, Qin Chuan had chased after Guru and then appeared behind him 2 days later. This made Foryo realize that Guru had also died at Qin Chuan's hands. Foryo did not believe that he had the strength to defeat Qin Chuan, so the only thing he could do was to escape. Moreover, Foryo had already passed on the news that Qin Chuan had advanced to the transcending calamity stage and had killed Fetitic and Guru to the Demon King. The Demon King was on his way to rescue him. As long as he could hold on for a few more days, he would be able to wait for the Demon King. At that time, he could join forces with the Demon King to deal with Qin Chuan. Even if they were no match for Qin Chuan, there should be a high chance that they could escape. Yes, in Foryo's heart, even with the help of the Demon King, they would not be a match for Qin Chuan. This was because even with the Demon King's strength, it was almost impossible for him to kill Fetitic and Guru in succession. However, this matter seemed to be incomparably simple in Qin Chuan's hands. At this moment, Foryo's heart was filled with incomparable regret. If he had known that Qin Chuan would grow so quickly and with such astonishing growth, he would have killed Qin Chuan in a flash the first time they met. However, it was already too late for Foryo to regret. Just as Foryo was thinking about this, a spatial portal suddenly appeared in front of him. Qin Chuan's figure slowly walked out from it. When Foryo saw this, his expression immediately became vigilant. It seemed that Qin Chuan was ready to make a move. However, what surprised Foryo was that Qin Chuan was not in a hurry to make a move after walking out of the spatial portal. Instead, he looked at Foryo with a playful gaze and said indifferently, "We should be leaving the Deus Cluster's range if we continue forward. Let's just wait here." Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Foryo's expression changed slightly and he asked, "What are you talking about?" Qin Chuan smiled and said, "After you returned to the Deus Cluster, you immediately fled in the direction of the Devil Planet. Wasn't it because you told the Demon King about what happened and asked him to come pick you up?" When Foryo heard Qin Chuan's words, his expression suddenly became unsightly. He did not expect Qin Chuan to have already guessed this matter. Furthermore, Qin Chuan was not worried at all. Qin Chuan's calmness made Foryo feel that Qin Chuan's strength was unfathomable. Qin Chuan looked at Foryo with a smile and calmly said, "I thought about it. If I kill you directly, the Demon King might not come. I will have to take the initiative to look for him in the future, which is quite troublesome. Why don't we wait here for the Demon King to pick you up and then kill both of you? It's simple and convenient." Chapter 1303. Seeing the smile on Qin Chuan's face, Foryo felt incomparably terrified. At this moment, it was as though Qin Chuan was the Demon King of this universe. Just one look at him was enough to make one's heart tremble. As a supreme existence at the Tribulation Transcendence realm, Foao had lived for over 10,000 years, and his temperament had been tempered since a long time ago. He should have been able to remain calm and indifferent in the face of anything. However, since he encountered Qin Chuan, it was difficult for Foao to maintain such an indifferent mental state. In Foryo's eyes, Qin Chuan was his nemesis. Ever since he met Qin Chuan, everything had been going wrong for him. Now, his life was in danger. In the past, Foryo had always believed that as long as a supreme existence didn't make a move, no one in this universe could kill him. However, Qin Chuan's appearance told Foryo that this person existed. He hadn't met him before because he hadn't. Now, not only did Qin Chuan want to kill him, but he also wanted to use him as bait to lure the Demon King over. This was simply too crazy. "You seem to be very afraid." Qin Chuan looked at Foryo's expression and smiled faintly. "I still remember the first time I met you. Your indifferent and cold expression. Your every move was filled with the demeanor of a powerhouse. I really have to thank you for letting me live back then. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the chance to chat with you here today. Hearing Qinchuan's words, Fulo felt as though his heart was being stabbed. He took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. Then, he said to Qinchuan, "The demon race's army has already retreated from Audon Nebula and is returning to the Devil Star. As long as you let me go, I can guarantee that the demon race will never invade another star cluster." Hearing Fulo's words, Qinchuan gently shook his head and said, "After you stab the knife into the Deus cluster, even if you pull it out and stop the bleeding, it will still leave a wound. I won't agree to your conditions." Fulo's expression became extremely unsightly. He clenched his teeth and asked Qinchuan, "Do you really want to fight to the death with us? This won't do you any good." "You're wrong." Qinchuan shook his head again. "The fish will definitely die, but the net won't break." Seeing Qinchuan's confident expression, Fu finally stopped talking. He was very clear that today's matter was very difficult to resolve. As the king of the demon race, the Demon King could not afford to fail, nor could he afford to be in any danger. Therefore, he decided to face Qinchuan alone. Whoosh! Suddenly, a large amount of black fog gushed out from behind Fu. Countless demonic shadows struggled and roared within the black fog, emitting ear-piercing noises. All of a sudden, a demonic shadow with blood-red eyes charged out from the black fog, shrieking as it charged towards Qinchuan. Qinchuan raised his hand and destroyed the demonic shadow with a punch. Then, he asked Flo, "Are you planning to attack me now?" Fulo took a deep look at Qinchuan and said in a deep voice, "The Demon King won't come." Hearing Fulo's words, Qinchuan was slightly surprised and said, "You're quite loyal. Since that's the case, why did you abandon Fadertic and run for your life?" Fulo didn't want to answer Qinchuan's question. He controlled the demonic figures in the black fog to devour each other and condensed a huge bloody mouth with dozens of arms, hundreds of eyes, and sharp teeth. It was evil and sinister. Qinchuan looked at the demonic figure Fulo had condensed with a cold expression. He raised his hand and attacked the demonic figure. The powerful power of the law of space tore the demonic figure into dozens of pieces in an instant. However, the demonic figure didn't dissipate because of this. Instead, it condensed again, and its aura didn't weaken in the slightest. Roar! The demonic figure roared and pounced at Qinchuan. The dozens of arms grabbed at Qinchuan. The sharp nails tore through space and exploded with a sharp sound that stimulated people's eardrums and caused them to hallucinate. If it was an ordinary person facing this demonic figure, their mind might have already sunk into chaos. However, Qinchuan's mental strength was extremely powerful. The sharp sound only made Qinchuan feel that it was a bit noisy, but it didn't have any hallucinogenic effect. "It's so noisy." Qinchuan coldly snorted. He raised his hand and released the heavenly demon seal. A huge dragon phantom and human phantom appeared from the seal and attacked the demonic figure, blocking its attack. Demonic shadow perplexing track. When Fulo saw that the demonic figure was blocked, he immediately injected his immortal power into the demonic figure. The demonic figure's strength suddenly increased greatly after receiving the immortal power. It opened its mouth and spat out a cloud of black fog, which enveloped the space within a radius of 10,000 miles. In the black fog, there were layers of demonic figures and wailing sounds. Those with weak willpower would definitely be affected and lose their mind. However, Qinchuan wasn't affected at all. In front of his mental strength of the spirit condensation realm, the wailing sounds were only a bit noisy, but they had no effect at all. However, Fulo never expected that these methods would have any effect on Qinchuan. All he wanted to do was to block Qinchuan's 5 senses, and buy some time to prepare his killing move. Fulo looked at the heavy fog in front of him, and no longer hesitated. He bit his right thumb and used his blood to inscribe a rune in front of him. The rune was eerie and strange, revealing an evil aura. When Fullo inscribed the rune, Qin Chuan, who was in the fog, immediately sensed a dangerous aura. Immediately, Qin Chuan used the law of lightning's extreme yang energy to violently break through the heavy fog. Then, he saw Fullo's blood continuously flowing from the wound on his thumb into the rune in front of him. Looking at the eerie and strange rune, Qin Chuan couldn't help but frown slightly. It seemed that it was already a bit too late for him to stop Fullo's actions. When Fullo saw Qin Chuan break through the fog, he immediately cut off the blood supply to the rune. Then, he poured all of his immortal power into the rune and roared, "Vast imperial might." Following Fullo's roar, the rune gradually began to swell and distort, slowly turning into a blurry figure. Then, an extremely terrifying aura descended. When he sensed the terrifying aura emitted from the blurry figure, Qin Chuan's expression suddenly changed. This aura, this astonishing suppressive power, could it be the Demon Emperor? Qin Chuan was shocked. Only the Demon Emperor, who was a supreme existence, could make Fullo spend so much effort to summon him. Buzz. A spatial portal opened in front of Qin Chuan, and Qin Chuan entered it without hesitation. His figure instantly appeared thousands of miles away, and he was still moving far away at an extremely fast speed. Regardless of whether Fullo had summoned the Demon Emperor or not, it was not an existence that Qin Chuan could provoke. If he didn't escape now, he might not have the chance later. Chapter 1304. Seeing Qin Chuan fleeing into the distance, Fu couldn't help but reveal a pleased expression. Previously, he had been chased so pathetically by Qin Chuan. Now, it was his turn to chase after Qin Chuan. No matter how far you run, the Demon Emperor will always be within reach. Fu roared. The blurry figure standing in front of him immediately chased after Qin Chuan. After the blurry figure left, Fu's face suddenly became incomparably pale, and his aura withered. He was so weak that it seemed like even a body integration stage overlord could easily kill him. In order to summon the Demon Emperor's projection, Fu had not only paid the price of 1/3 of his blood essence, but also 1,000 years of his lifespan. Now, Fu had truly entered the weakest period in history. He had less than 10% of his combat strength left. If he wanted to recover, he would need at least 300 to 500 years. If it weren't for Qin Chuan's relentless pursuit, Fu wouldn't have been willing to use such a trump card. However, in order to survive, this price was worth it for Fu. Fu didn't care whether the Demon Emperor's projection could kill Qin Chuan or not. He continued to fly in the direction of the Devil Star and ordered the troops stationed on the Devil Star to come and rescue him. He had to return to the Devil Palace as soon as possible to recuperate. On the other side, Qin Chuan had already fled hundreds of thousands of kilometers away using the space traversal technique. However, the Demon Emperor's projection caught up to him in a short period of time. This caused Qin Chuan's mood to become incomparably heavy. I've just advanced to the tribulation stage, and I have to face the Demon Emperor's projection. This is too much. Qin Chuan felt that there was no one in this universe who was more miserable than him. When he was only at the body integration stage, he had to face a supreme existence at the tribulation stage. Now that he had advanced to the tribulation stage with great difficulty, he had to face the supreme power of a supreme existence. It was truly too miserable. However, this wasn't the time to complain about this. He had to think of a way to deal with the Demon Emperor's projection. Seeing that the Demon Emperor's projection had caught up to him, Qin Chuan turned around and tried to counterattack. However, the Demon Emperor's projection arrived in front of Qin Chuan at an extremely fast speed and pierced through Qin Chuan's chest in the blink of an eye. After the Demon Emperor's projection pierced through Qin Chuan's chest, it abruptly dissipated. This Demon Emperor's projection only had the power of a supreme existence of supreme existence. However, this attack was an attack from a cultivator of the highest level. It was not something an attack from a cultivator of the highest level of the tribulation level could compare to. Even if it was just a tiny bit, it was still extremely terrifying. At this moment, Qin Chuan didn't seem to be hurt. However, there was an extremely evil force inside Qin Chuan's body that was recklessly destroying Qin Chuan's internal organs. In the face of this evil force, the immortal qi inside Qin Chuan's body was almost completely routed. It was completely unable to resist the evil force's corrosion. Qin Chuan's aura declined almost instantly. Like a withered flower, his vitality was withering. All this happened in the span of a few breaths. Space freezing. At this critical moment, Qin Chuan had no choice but to use the law of space to freeze the evil force inside his body. When the evil force's corrosion on Qin Chuan's body slowed down, Qin Chuan didn't hesitate to use the time reversal technique. Under the effect of the law of time, the evil force slowly withdrew from Qin Chuan's body and collapsed. However, Qin Chuan's internal injuries couldn't be healed by the time reversal technique. But for Qin Chuan, this was already a blessing in disguise. Being able to live was better than anything else. I can use the time reversal technique to reverse the flow of the evil force because this evil force came from Fu's blood. The injuries in my body were caused by the demon emperor's power. Qin Chuan muttered in a low voice. His pale face was filled with joy. If the demon emperor's projection didn't have the power to attack, he definitely wouldn't have been able to survive. Qin Chuan was no longer in the mood to continue chasing after Fu. He needed to find a place to recuperate first. Qin Chuan randomly found a barren planet and sent his coordinates to Lu Zi through the photon computer. At the same time, he sent a message to Lu Zi to pick him up on the Hope. When Qin Chuan started to recuperate, he realized that his injuries were far more difficult to recover from than he had imagined. This aura should be the law of evil. If I want to recover from my injuries, I must first dispel the law of evil in my body. Qin Chuan frowned. He used his mental force to sense the cryptic evil aura lingering around his corroded internal organs. His expression was grave. Even with the law of thunder, it was extremely difficult to dispel the law of evil. He had to think of another way. Void Empire. In the magnificent palace, two figures sat high up in the palace hall. They coldly looked at the shattered dark purple crystal in front of them with gloomy expressions. The void crystal has shattered. This means that Feditic has died. The figure sitting on the left spoke slowly. His voice was deep and hoarse. Who was it that killed Feditic? Could it be that an ultimate existence has made a move? This time around, the one who spoke was the figure sitting on the right. His voice sounded younger and more magnetic. The figure on the left turned to look at the figure on the right and said, "Shouldn't we make a trip down? That's good as well. The speed at which we're seizing the Void Spirit's powers has suddenly slowed down. We should go and take a look at the situation and deal with the Void Spirit while we're at it," the figure on the right said calmly. "Why don't you make a trip down?" The figure on the left did not rebut. His figure slowly disappeared from his seat. After the figure on the left left, the figure on the right let out a sigh and disappeared as well. Holy Cluster, Sage Monarch Continent. A figure rushed toward the sacred palace, holding an exquisite wooden box in his hands. He knelt outside the sacred palace's door while trembling in fear and said loudly, "Sage Emperor! The White Army's General Guru has died." Rumble. The tightly shut door to the sacred palace slowly opened up, revealing a gap that could allow one person to pass through. When Zerg, who had come to report the news, saw this, he immediately got up and walked in. In the sacred palace, a tall figure sat on a high platform. He looked at Zerg with a sharp gaze and said in a deep voice, "What did you say earlier?" Hearing that person immediately knelt down and raised both his hands up, presenting the wooden box before the tall figure. He said in a trembling voice, "Sage Emperor, this is the vital bug of the White Army's General Guru. It's already shattered. Hearing that person's words, the sage emperor raised his hand and took the wooden box into his hand. He looked at the white beetle that had shattered into several pieces, and his countenance instantly turned extremely grim. Send down my orders. Investigate this matter thoroughly. As a supreme existence among Zerg who had undergone the tribulation, Guru must not die for no reason. Chapter 1305. After Qinchuan had rested on the barren planet for 10 days, Lu Zi and Zhou Lin finally arrived on the Hope and found Qinchuan, who was not in a good condition. Looking at Qinchuan, who was surrounded by an extremely evil aura, Lu Zi's expression changed greatly. She hurriedly asked, "Qinchuan, what's wrong?" Hearing Lu Zi's words, Qinchuan shook his head lightly and said to Lu Zi, "I'm fine. Let's return to Celestial Planet." Lu Zi and Zhou Lin wanted to go forward to help Qinchuan, but before they could get close to Qinchuan, they were forced back by the evil aura. "Don't come near me," Qinchuan said weakly to Lu Zi and Zhou Lin. "It's very dangerous." As he spoke, Qinchuan stood up from the ground and slowly walked towards the Hope. Lu Zi and Zhou Lin followed behind Qinchuan. They were extremely worried, but there was nothing they could do. When Qinchuan boarded the Hope, Bai Yu, as the weapon spirit, immediately felt an extremely evil aura corroding the Hope. Before Bai Yu could react, Qinchuan covered himself with immortal energy and cut off his connection with the Hope. "Return to Celestial Planet quickly. Also, inform Pope Saint Baudelo that I need his help." After Qinchuan reminded Lu Zi, he closed his eyes and said no more. Seeing this, Lu Zi immediately contacted Pope Saint Baudelo, hoping that Saint Baudelo could come and meet up with the Hope as soon as possible. 4 days later, on the way back to Celestial Planet, the Hope ran into Saint Baudor, who was rushing over. When Saint Baudor arrived on the Hope and saw Qinchuan's condition, his old face was immediately filled with shock. "Who did you meet?" Faced with Saint Baudor's question, Qinchuan weakly replied, "Demon Emperor." Hearing Qinchuan's answer, Saint Baudelo couldn't help but gasp. Lu Zi and the others standing at the side were also shocked. Qinchuan actually encountered the Nephilim Emperor? It's not the Devil Emperor himself, but a phantom of the Devil Emperor. It only has the power of a single strike from the Devil Emperor. Qinchuan gave a simple explanation. If he were to face the Devil Emperor himself, he would have no chance to escape. Upon hearing this, Saint Baudelo exclaimed, "Even if it's just a blow from the Nephilim Emperor, it's not something that anyone can withstand. It's really fortunate that you're still alive." Qinchuan pursed his lips and said, "I'm chasing after Furo." Furo summoned the phantom of the Demon Emperor. Hearing Qinchuan's explanation, Saint Baudelo curiously asked, "Why did you suddenly chase after Furo?" Qinchuan glanced at Saint Baudelo and said, "I was tempering myself on the continent you mentioned. Then, Fedetic, Guru, and Furo found me. A battle broke out between me and them." Saint Baudelo stared blankly for a moment before asking, "What about Fedetic and Guru?" Qinchuan replied, "Killed them." Qinchuan's answer was understated, but Saint Baudelo felt dizzy. No wonder Qinchuan was chasing after Furo, and Furo didn't even have the courage to turn back and resist. It turned out that Qinchuan had already killed Fedetic and Guru. Thinking about it, if not for Qinchuan relentlessly chasing after him, Furo wouldn't have summoned the phantom of the Nephilim Emperor to fight Qinchuan to the death. "I really don't know what to say about you." Saint Baudelo looked at Qinchuan with an extremely complicated gaze and said, "This is the first time I've seen someone like you. You're really astonishingly powerful." Qinchuan smiled bitterly and said, "Let's not chat for now. Do you have any way to help me dispel the power of the evil law in my body?" Saint Baudelo squatted beside Qinchuan. After sensing the situation of Qinchuan's body, he slightly frowned and said, "I don't have any good methods for this." Hearing Saint Baudelot's answer, Chinchuan's face couldn't help but become a little unsightly. If even Saint Baudelot had no way, then he really didn't know who to ask for help from. But I know a method that might be of help to your injuries. Saint Baudelot looked up at Chinchuan and said, "The Tian people have a heaven lake. If you can bathe in the heaven lake, it might be able to dispel the power of the evil law in your body." Hearing this, Chinchuan somewhat doubtfully asked, "Heaven lake? Why haven't I heard that the Tian people have a heaven lake?" Saint Baudelot explained to Chinchuan, "The heaven lake is a forbidden area for the Tian people. It's similar to the continent you went to before. Every 3,000 years, only one person can enter to bathe. It's an extremely rare opportunity. Many people among the Tian people are eyeing this opportunity. I'm afraid it'll be very difficult for you to enter to bathe. So it's a forbidden area for the Tian people." Chinchuan slightly frowned and said, "Is there any other way besides this?" Saint Baudelot shook his head and said, "This is the only way I know. Apart from this, unless you can ask for the help of a supreme existence, it'll be too difficult to dispel the power of the evil law with just your and my strength." "I understand." Chinchuan took a deep breath and said, "I'll give it a try." Now that Chinchuan didn't have time to waste, he immediately contacted Tian San and told him about his situation. When Tian San heard that Chinchuan wanted to bathe in the heaven lake, his tone suddenly became serious. This matter was no longer something that the elders could decide. They had to report it to the Sky Emperor. Stansos, Region 1. In a solemn and holy palace, the Sky Emperor, who was dressed in a moon-white robe, stood beside the heaven lake that was only 10 meters wide. He looked at the clear water in the heaven lake with a subtle expression. He thought about the news that Tian San had reported and hesitated. Chinchuan's advancement to the transcending tribulation stage was extremely exciting news for the endless allied army. However, Chinchuan had been attacked by the demon emperor's projection and was seriously injured. He urgently needed to bathe in the heaven lake to dispel the power of the evil law. In this regard, the Tian people should have worked together to help Chinchuan overcome this difficulty. However, the Sky Emperor had already promised the first Prince Chilon the 3,000-year-old heaven lake's water. Now that Chilon was at the peak of the unity stage, as long as he bathed in the heaven lake's water, he had a 40% chance of advancing to the transcending tribulation stage. This was a very rare opportunity for Chilon, so he probably wouldn't give it up so easily. Just as the Sky Emperor was thinking about this, the tall and handsome first Prince Chilon slowly walked in from outside. He bowed respectfully to the Sky Emperor and said, "Father, are you looking for me?" The Sky Emperor slowly turned around and looked at Chilon. He then told Chilon about Chinchuan and waited for Chilon to make a decision. After thinking for a moment, Chilon replied, "I can give the opportunity to bathe in the heaven lake to Chinchuan, but I have a condition." Chapter 1306. On the Hope, Lu Zi, as the contact person, had just received a reply from the Tian people. First Prince Chiron agreed to give Chinchuan the opportunity to bathe in the heavenly lake, but he had a condition. He wanted to know how Chinchuan successfully advanced to the tribulation stage in less than a month. Chinchuan could advance to the tribulation stage in less than a month not only because of his extraordinary talent, but also because of the existence of the Millstone Continent. However, the existence of the Millstone Continent was a secret of the One God religion. Chinchuan did not have the authority to tell the Tian people about the existence of the Millstone Continent. If he wanted to make a deal with the Tian people, he had to get the approval of Pope Saint Baudelot. Faced with this problem, Saint Baudelot did not think much about it and readily agreed that Chinchuan could tell the Tian people about the existence of the Millstone Continent. Originally, the existence of the Millstone Continent was indeed a secret of the One God religion, and no one knew about it. However, since the three of them found the Millstone Continent and attacked Qinchuan, the existence of the Millstone Continent was no longer a secret. In that case, there was no harm in telling the Tian people and helping Qinchuan. Qinchuan looked at Saint Bartolo gratefully and sincerely said, "Thank you. You don't have to thank me. I help you because I hope to borrow your strength to take back the Deus cluster." Saint Bartolo looked at Qinchuan and smiled. "I hope you can recover soon and return soon." When the Hope passed by the celestial planet, Saint Bartolo left the Hope and returned to the celestial planet to continue protecting the temporary frontline commander, Chun Changxing, while Qinchuan and the others continued to rush to Stansos. During the 1 month that Qinchuan and the others were on their way to Stansos, the Endless Allied Army had officially launched a full-scale counterattack against the Demon faction. On the Demon faction's side, Zerg's army and the Void Empire's expeditionary army had returned to the transformed Skyvoid continent and were heading for the Devil Star. Meanwhile, the Demon faction's army had returned to the Devil Star and were building a defensive line. In this 1 month's time, Qinchuan had successfully advanced to the Ascension stage, and the news of him killing the Void Empire's expeditionary army commander Frederick, Zerg's commander Guru, and severely injuring the Nephilim's commander Fro had already spread throughout the universe. Everyone was shocked, and because of this, the Demon faction did not have the slightest intention to resist and was easily defeated. In this 1 month's time, the Endless Allied Army had swept through the Deus Cluster and reclaimed all the territories of the Deus Cluster from the Demon faction. Although all the territories of the Deus Cluster had been reclaimed, the Deus Cluster had suffered heavy losses after the war. It would take at least a few hundred years for them to recover. Moreover, the war was far from over, and no one knew when the Demon faction's counterattack would come. Therefore, the matter of rebuilding their homeland had to be delayed for a while to avoid doing useless work. Once again returning to Stansos, Qinchuan was not in the mood to feel emotional. He went directly to District 1 and met Elder Tianjiu at the starport. When he saw Qinchuan again, Tianjiu was very emotional. He still remembered that when he first met Qinchuan was only at the Paradise stage. In the blink of an eye, Qinchuan had advanced to the Ascension stage, becoming an extremely rare and supreme existence in the universe. However, when he saw Qinchuan's weak performance, Tianjiu suppressed the idea of staying with Qinchuan for a long time and brought Qinchuan directly to the Heavenly Pool Palace where the Heavenly Pool was located. At this time, the Sky Emperor and Crown Prince Chiron were standing outside the Heavenly Pool Palace. When they saw Qinchuan and the others coming from afar, the Sky Emperor asked Chiron, who was standing beside him, "What do you think of Qinchuan?" When Chiron heard the Sky Emperor's words, he thought for a moment before replying, "He is very powerful, more powerful than me." Chiron had always been a very confident and even conceited person. In the universe, among his peers, there was no one who could convince him. However, Qinchuan's appearance made Chiron have to admit that Qinchuan was stronger than him. The Sky Emperor nodded slightly and said, "It's good to be able to see your strengths and weaknesses clearly, but don't lose your drive to improve. You may not be as good as him now, but that doesn't mean you won't have a chance to surpass him in this lifetime." Chiron nodded and said to the Sky Emperor, "Father, I won't give up on myself." As the Sky Emperor and Chiron spoke, Qinchuan and the others had already arrived. Tianjiu introduced Qinchuan. "This is the Sky Emperor, and this is Crown Prince Chiron." Hearing Tianjiu's introduction, Qinchuan smiled at the Sky Emperor and said, "Greetings, Senior." Speaking of this, Qinchuan turned to look at Chiron and said, "Thank you, Crown Prince, for being willing to give me the opportunity to bathe in the Sky Lake." When he heard Qinchuan's words, the Sky Emperor nodded slightly and said, "Now is not the time to chat. Let's bathe in the Sky Lake first." The Sky Emperor could see that Qinchuan's organs had been invaded by the evil laws and were at the point of no return. If this dragged on, even if the Sky Lake could wash away the evil laws, Qin Chuan would need a very long time to recover. Qin Chuan didn't argue. After thanking the Sky Emperor again, he walked into the Sky Lake Palace and stood in front of the Sky Lake. Qin Chuan looked at the clear water in the Sky Lake and asked curiously, "What do I have to do?" The Sky Emperor replied, "Take off your outer clothes and bathe. You should be fine in 3 days." Qin Chuan did not avoid everyone. He directly took off his outer clothes and entered the Sky Lake in just his underwear. The moment his body came into contact with the water, Qin Chuan could not help but shiver. It was not because of the cold, but because of the comfort. When Qin Chuan completely immersed himself in the Sky Lake, apart from his head, Qin Chuan could feel strands of white water seeping into his body through his pores. They constantly attacked the evil laws in his body. The evil laws, which had been so stubborn that they did not move at all, actually showed signs of melting in the face of the white water. When the power of the evil laws began to melt, the clear Sky Lake gradually turned a faint gray. As time went on, the water became murky. Everyone standing beside the sky pond breathed a sigh of relief when they saw this. Although they had guessed that the sky pond's water would be able to wash away the power of the evil laws within Qin Chuan's body, they were still somewhat worried before witnessing it with their own eyes. "Thank you, Sky Emperor. Thank you, Prince." Lu Zi thanked the Sky Emperor and Kai Long emotionally. If it weren't for the Sky Lake, she really would not know what she would have done. "Haha, we are allies. Qin Chuan has paid a price, so there is no need to be so polite." The Sky Emperor smiled faintly and said to Lu Zi, "I still have matters to attend to, so I will be leaving first. When Qin Chuan comes out in 3 days, we will meet again." Chapter 1307. The Great Demonic Star Cluster. After going through a series of heart-wrenching experiences, Fu finally returned to the Demon Palace. Looking at the familiar buildings and breathing in the familiar space, Fu's eyes even brimmed with tears. The Demon King slowly walked over from afar. He looked at Fu, who was so thin that he was only skin and bones, and said in a deep voice, "Previously, you suddenly told me that you didn't need my help and asked me to return to the Demon Palace to wait for you. I thought that you had successfully escaped Qin Chuan's pursuit, but it seems like that wasn't the case." Hearing the Demon King's words, Fu said in an extremely low voice, "I did escape Qin Chuan's pursuit, but I also used the power that the Demon Emperor bestowed upon me." The Demon King frowned slightly and asked, "Is Qin Chuan really that powerful?" The Demon King had always been skeptical about Qin Chuan's strength. After all, he had never seen Qin Chuan transcend the immortal tribulation with his own eyes, so he didn't understand Qin Chuan's current strength. However, although the Demon King didn't understand Qin Chuan's current strength, he knew very well how terrifying the power that the Demon Emperor bestowed upon Fu was. Although it was only one attack, it was enough to instantly kill any Tribulation Passing Stage expert. Tribulation Passing Stage experts were known as Supreme Existences, but in front of a Supreme Existence, they were just ants. Qin Chuan is very strong. Even now, when he recalled the scene of Qin Chuan transcending the immortal tribulation, Fu still felt frightened. He had never seen such a terrifying immortal tribulation before. Seeing Fu's lingering fear, the Demon King comforted him, "It's fine. He's already dead. You don't have to think about it anymore." Fu shook his head and said, "No, he's not dead." The Demon King was stunned and said, "Didn't you already use the power that the Demon Emperor bestowed upon you? How can Qin Chuan not die?" That was an attack from the Demon Emperor, an attack from a Supreme Existence. As a Tribulation Passing Stage expert, how could Qin Chuan not die? However, Fu firmly shook his head and said, "I don't think he will die. He won't die so easily." Hearing Furo's words, the Demon King frowned and said, "Are you sure?" Frau nodded and replied, "Qin Chuan is really too strong." Fedetic and Guru have already died in Qinchuan's hands. If I didn't have the power bestowed upon me by the Demon Emperor, I would have died as well. The Demon Emperor's attack is enough to instantly kill any ordinary tribulation passing stage expert, but Qinchuan, he's not ordinary. The Demon King took a deep look at Fau and said in a deep voice, "So, I wasn't a match for Qinchuan?" Fu raised his head to look at the Nephilim Emperor and replied, "He's really too strong." Flo didn't say that the Demon King wasn't a match for Qinchuan, but his answer explained everything. This made the Demon King's mood extremely bad. Qinchuan's existence was a huge threat to them. Qinchuan took a hit from the Demon Emperor. Even if he doesn't die, he won't have it easy. The Demon King said in a deep voice, "Rest well, Fu. You don't have to fight anymore. I'll have food take your place." Flo was surprised to hear this. Food already reached the tribulation passing stage? The Demon King nodded. It was the Demon Emperor who helped Food take the final step and successfully transcend his immortal tribulation. Fu nodded. "Make sure to tell Food to be careful." In the Holy Cluster, the atmosphere in the Sage Monarch continent was extremely gloomy. Tribulation passing stage experts were extremely important to any organization. Guru's sudden death had caught Zerg's upper echelons off guard. Many of the plans that had been made around Guru had to be scrapped or changed, greatly affecting Zerg's overall plans. Now that the front lines had been defeated and there was no way out, Zerg's army had no choice but to retreat to the Great Devil Star Cluster. Zerg was in urgent need of a general who could oversee the front lines and lead the army there. In the dazzling Sage Palace, the Saint Emperor sat on a high platform, calmly looking at the tall blue figure below. "Lan Ao, why aren't you willing to go to the front lines?" In response to the Saint Emperor's question, Lan Ao calmly replied, "I still need to oversee Chaotic Rock Planet. I really can't split myself." "You don't need to worry about Chaotic Rock Planet. I'll take care of it." The Saint Emperor looked at Lan Ao. "However, the matter of reorganizing the front lines is urgent. It can't be delayed." Lan Ao smiled faintly. "The soldiers on the front lines are in a state of panic because of Guru's death. Morale has long since collapsed. The way I see it, it would be better for the Saint Emperor to personally lead the troops. That way, the soldiers on the front lines will definitely be able to rally." Hearing Lan Ao's words, the Saint Emperor could not help but fall silent. The Sage Palace suddenly became so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. After a long time, the Saint King took a deep look at Lan Ao and said, "Are you challenging my authority?" Hearing this, Lan Ao smiled and said, "The position of Holy King is open to everyone. Whoever defeats the previous Holy King can become the next Holy King. I remember that this is a rule that has been passed down since ancient times. However, ever since you took the position of Holy King, you called yourself the Holy Emperor and abolished this rule. Now I plan to re-establish this rule." The Saint Emperor looked indifferently at Lan Ao. "Do you think that with Guru's death, I alone can't suppress you?" Lan Ao sneered. "Isn't that so?" A long time ago, Lan Ao had been coveting the Saint Emperor's seat. However, because Guru was a firm supporter of the Saint Emperor, he had been enduring silently. Now that Guru had fallen, the Saint Emperor had lost a great help. Lan Ao once again saw the hope of sitting on that seat. No matter what, he did not want to miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Facing the unruly Lan Ao, the Saint Emperor sighed faintly. "Lan Ao, do you know why I abolished this rule and called myself the Saint Emperor?" Hearing the Saint Emperor's words, Lan Ao frowned slightly and asked, "What do you want to say?" The Saint Emperor looked deeply at Lan Ao. "You want the seat of the Sage King. I can give it to you. However, the Saint Emperor can only be me. Do you understand?" As the Saint Emperor's voice fell, an extremely shocking pressure suddenly erupted from his body and enveloped Lan Ao. Under this pressure, Lan Ao's face suddenly turned pale. His body uncontrollably knelt on the ground. Lan Ao lowered his head. The expression on his face was incomparably frightened. His eyes were wide open, his mouth was wide open, and he gasped violently. It seemed that he could not bear the burden. The last time Lan Ao had this feeling was when he was facing the angry insect queen. This pressure came and went quickly. The Saint Emperor looked at Lan Ao kneeling on the ground and asked, "Now, do you have any objections to my order?" Lan Ao immediately replied in a trembling voice, "I dare not have any objections." Chapter 1308. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye for cultivators. After 3 days of bathing, Qinchuan successfully washed away the power of the evil law in his body with the help of the heavenly lake water. The originally clear heavenly lake water had turned into a pool of muddy water. If it wasn't for the heavenly lake water restraining the filth, the entire first region would have been polluted. Splash! When Qinchuan got up from the heavenly lake, Lu Zi, who was guarding beside the lake, immediately stopped cultivating. She opened her eyes and looked at Qinchuan. Seeing that Qinchuan's face had recovered, she immediately asked with concern, "How are you?" Qinchuan smiled at Lu Zi and said, "I feel better than ever." Lu Zi got up and walked to Qinchuan's side. After personally sensing that Qinchuan's body was fine, she was relieved. She said to Qinchuan, "Although the power of the evil law has been dispelled, your injuries haven't healed yet. It's no longer a problem. Without the power of the evil law, these injuries will recover in less than 2 days." Now that Qinchuan was a supreme existence in the tribulation passing stage, it could be said that he had touched the ceiling of cultivation in this universe. He was no longer an ordinary cultivator, but an existence that could be called immortal. These injuries were indeed nothing. Lu Zi smiled at Qinchuan and said, "I haven't had the time to congratulate you. Now that you are a supreme existence in the tribulation passing stage, there are not many people in this universe who are stronger than you." Qinchuan smiled and said, "That's what I thought at first. However, I almost died a few days after advancing to the tribulation stage. This made me not dare to think that way anymore. There's always someone better than me. I don't dare to be too complacent now." After chatting for a while, Qinchuan asked Lu Zi, "Did anything happen in these 3 days?" Lu Zi shook her head and said, "Nothing happened, but the Sky Emperor hopes that you can meet him when you wake up." Qinchuan smiled and said to Lu Zi, "Of course. I was in a hurry that day, so I didn't have time to properly thank the Sky Emperor and the First Prince. Today, no matter what, I have to thank them face to face. Let's go see the Sky Emperor." The Tian clan was different from the other races. They had always pursued freedom. From the Heavenly Emperor to the upper echelons of the Elder Courtyard, they all lived in the vast grasslands. Even the noble Heavenly Emperor lived in a thatched hut. That day in the Heavenly Lake Palace, the Heavenly Emperor was wearing a moon-white robe. Today, at home, the Heavenly Emperor was wearing a gray hemp robe. There were even 2 patches on the hemp robe. The Heavenly Emperor wasn't pretending. The hemp robe he wore was not only patched, but also starched many times. It was obvious that it wasn't prepared on the spot. When Qinchuan and Lu Zi arrived in front of the thatched hut, the Heavenly Emperor was tending to a small vegetable garden on the left side of the hut. He smiled at Qinchuan and said, "Don't leave this afternoon. Eat here." Qinchuan looked at the dirt on the Heavenly Emperor's hands and the black fingernails. He asked curiously, "Senior, do you live like this every day?" The Heavenly Emperor smiled and nodded. "Ever since I reached the crossing calamity stage, I rarely go out. Every day is very leisurely. If it weren't for your arrival, I wouldn't have taken out my robe that had been in a box for hundreds of years." Among the Tian people, guests were usually received by the elders. If Qinchuan hadn't reached the crossing calamity stage and become another supreme existence in the universe, he wouldn't have been qualified to meet the Heavenly Emperor. If Qinchuan hadn't reached the crossing calamity stage, He wouldn't have been able to meet the Heavenly Emperor in Area 1 even though he was the commander of the endless Allied forces. The Heavenly Emperor would have spent his time farming instead of receiving Qinchuan. This was a natural difference in status, and had nothing to do with anything else. The Heavenly Emperor asked Qinchuan to sit down at a stone table. Then, he said to Qinchuan, I want to meet you mainly because I want to get to know you, a peerless genius who reached the crossing calamity stage before the age of 100. Before you, no one has reached the crossing calamity stage before the age of 100. Even reaching the form synthesis stage before the age of 100 is amazing. Hearing the Heavenly Emperor's words, Qinchuan smiled and said, It's just a coincidence that I reached the crossing calamity stage. Qinchuan wasn't being modest. If he had followed the normal process, it would have been absolutely impossible for him to reach the crossing calamity stage so easily. When he was at the form synthesis stage, he had fused so much strength that it would have taken him at least 3 to 5 years to completely fuse them into one. A coincidence is also a strength. Others don't even have the chance to have such a coincidence. The Heavenly Emperor smiled and said to Qinchuan, You don't have to be modest. I know about your past. Since you appeared in the Sinai galaxy, everything you have done is very difficult for ordinary people to do. Your rise was never a coincidence. It was inevitable. The Heavenly Emperor really thought highly of Qinchuan. The only thing that the Heavenly Emperor regretted was that Qinchuan wasn't a Tian people and couldn't marry into the Tian people. Otherwise, the Heavenly Emperor wouldn't have minded training Qinchuan's future son as his successor. After praising Qinchuan, the Heavenly Emperor suddenly changed the topic. He asked Qinchuan, Qinchuan, what do you think of the Demon Alliance? Qinchuan was a little surprised. He asked, What are you talking about? Now that the Deus Cluster has been recovered and the Demon Alliance has retreated to the Great Demonic Star Cluster, do you think the Demon Alliance will fall apart or make a comeback? The Heavenly Emperor looked at Qinchuan with a subtle look. He was looking forward to Qinchuan's answer. After hearing the Heavenly Emperor's question, Qinchuan answered almost without hesitation, No matter what the Demon Alliance thinks, I won't let it go. Putting aside the Nephilim and Zerg for now, the Void Empire's expeditionary army must be destroyed. They must not be allowed to leave alive. Without considering personal grudges, Qinchuan felt that the matter between the Nephilim and Zerg could be resolved through negotiation. Only the matter of the Void Empire must be dealt with seriously. Hearing Qinchuan's answer, the Heavenly Emperor's face showed a touch of relief. He said, I thought you would want to kill the Nephilim and Zerg. Qinchuan smiled bitterly and said, The Nephilim have the Nephilim king, and Zerg has the Zerg queen. With these two, I think it's very difficult for a war to happen. Qinchuan never thought that heaven and the one true God Atheist would participate in this war. If the one true God Atheist really wanted to participate in this war, he wouldn't have watched the Deus Cluster fall and the one true God fall apart. Chapter 1309. The Sky Emperor and Qinchuan's conversation came to an end. The Sky Emperor didn't ask any more questions, and Qinchuan didn't ask anything either. The two of them even went to the vegetable garden to pick some fresh vegetables to cook lunch. Needless to say, the head chef was definitely the Heavenly Emperor, and Qinchuan was assisting him from the side. The two of them cooperated quite well. The lunch that the Sky Emperor served Qinchuan and Lu Zi was very simple. There were 2 vegetarian dishes, a bowl of mushroom soup and crystal clear rice. These ingredients were all personally grown by the Sky Emperor. They were very ordinary and were no different from the ingredients outside. After lunch, Qinchuan took the initiative to bid farewell to the Sky Emperor. He was still the commander of the endless Allied army. Everyone was still waiting for him in the Io Nebula. He had to go back to deal with some matters. The Sky Emperor did not ask him to stay. He politely sent Qinchuan to the starport in the first region. When Qin was about to board the starship and leave the first region, Lu Zi did not plan to go back with him. Faced with Qin's doubts, Lu Zi explained, "Senior sister is waiting for me in the second region. Now that you're fine, I don't have to stay by your side to take care of you. Senior sister and I are going to go to the Mopan continent with first Prince Kylon and try to advance to the tribulation passing stage." Hearing Lu Zi's words, Qin was a little surprised and asked, "Are you sure?" "Of course." Lu Zi smiled and said to Qin, "The next time we meet, I'll be a tribulation passing stage existence like you." Seeing that Lu Zi had made her decision, Qin did not ask any more. All along, Lu Zi had been independent and should not be seen as dependent on him. Therefore, he had always been very supportive of Lu Zi's pursuit. "Be careful. If you encounter any danger, you must contact me immediately." "Don't worry, I know." Just like that, Qin left by Lu Zi's side while he boarded the Fortress-class spaceship provided by the Tian people and set off for Io Nebula. By the time Qin returned to the Io Nebula, it was almost a month later. During this month, the endless Allied forces had completely wiped out the remnants of the demon faction in the Deus cluster, and the One God religion had regained control of the Deus cluster. Initially, when facing the attack of a powerful enemy, everyone could still gather all their strength and work together. However, now that the demon faction had retreated to the great demonic star cluster, and with Fidetic and Guru dead, they could no longer threaten the endless Allied army. Therefore, the hearts of the endless Allied army began to diverge. Some hoped to defeat the demon faction in one go, while others hoped to maintain the status quo and return to their homeland. Before Qin, the commander-in-chief, returned, the two sides could still maintain their rationality for the time being. However, when Qin returned, presumably the previously concealed contradictions would be exposed. After learning that Qin was about to arrive at the Io Nebula, all the higher-ups of the endless Allied army gathered on Laya and went to the conference room to wait for Qin's return. Those who wanted to completely defeat the demon faction in one go and those who wanted to keep the peace and maintain the status quo sat on both sides of the long table, looking at each other. The atmosphere was very solemn. Buzz. The door of the conference room slowly opened and Qin, dressed in black, walked in from the outside. He looked at the many higher-ups sitting on both sides of the long table with an extremely cold expression on his face. On the way back, Qin had learned about the cause and process of the matter from Chun Chongqing. He knew clearly that the endless Allied army was on the verge of collapse. If he could not handle this matter well, the consequences might be very bad. When everyone heard the sound of the door opening, they all turned their gazes towards the direction of the door. When they saw Qin's figure, their expressions changed slightly. It was rumored that Qin had successfully advanced to the crossing tribulation stage. Furthermore, he had killed Fidetic and Guru. His fame had spread far and wide. At that time, everyone present was amazed. When they faced Qin, they couldn't help but feel a little nervous. This was especially so for those higher-ups who wanted to keep the peace and maintain the status quo. They were afraid that Qin would cause trouble for them. In fact, those higher-ups who did not want the war to continue were almost all from various small and medium-sized factions. When the Deus cluster fell, the demon faction's troops had already threatened the security of their territory. Therefore, they had no choice but to join the endless Allied army and stand up to protect their race and the integrity of their territory. Now that the demon faction had retreated to the great demonic star cluster and the Deus cluster had returned to the One God sect, this meant that they had another layer of protection. Therefore, before this layer of protection was not a problem, they did not want to continue the war. As for those who wanted to continue the war and completely defeat the demon faction, they were the forces led by the Protoss and the Tian people. In terms of the overall situation, they were far better than these small and medium-sized factions. They knew very well that if the demon faction was not completely defeated, the war would never end. If they waited until the endless allied army was disbanded and the demon faction made a comeback, it would be too late to regroup and resist by then. Now, the debate between the two sides was still in private and had not been brought to the surface. Now that Qinchuan, as the commander-in-chief, had returned, Qinchuan's attitude would determine many things. And in everyone's guess, Qinchuan's attitude should be more inclined to the main side of the war. Under everyone's gaze, Qinchuan slowly walked to the head of the long table and sat down. He faced the crowd and said, "What were you all discussing before? Why is it so quiet now that I'm back?" When everyone heard Qinchuan's words, they were silent. No one spoke first. It was Chen Chongxing who broke the deadlock. He coughed softly and said to Qinchuan, "Everyone is discussing the next battle plan. In the original battle plan, the strategic goal of the endless allied army was to recapture the Deus cluster. Now that the Deus cluster had been recovered, the battle plan they had previously formulated was declared complete. Now it was time to formulate a new battle plan or disband on the spot. And all of this depended on Qinchuan's attitude. Qinchuan looked around at the crowd and asked, "I would like to ask those who advocate the disbandment of the alliance to stand up." As Qinchuan's voice faded, the main battle side immediately shifted their gazes to the people sitting opposite them. However, the people sitting opposite them avoided the gazes that were directed at them. They weren't willing to look them in the eye, and at the same time, they weren't willing to stand up. When Qinchuan saw that no one stood up, he smiled and said, "I know that everyone respects me. Since that's the case, please listen to me." After everyone looked over, Qinchuan pursed his lips and said, "The Nephilim and Zerg can be ignored, but the expeditionary army of the Void Empire must be completely annihilated." Chapter 13:10. When everyone present heard Qinchuan's words, their expressions became somewhat subtle. His words sounded like he was calling for war, but it also felt like Qinchuan was trying to smooth things over. In the face of everyone's silence, Qinchuan pondered for a moment before continuing, "I know that everyone may have some doubts in their hearts. Now let me explain it to everyone one by one. On the surface, this war seems to be instigated by the Nephilim, but in fact, it was instigated by the Void Empire. Of course, whether it is the Nephilim or Zerg, they are all guilty of heinous crimes that are almost unforgivable. However, in the face of the Void Empire's actions, everything else can be ignored for the time being. We can communicate with the demon faction. As long as the Nephilim can expel the Void Empire's expeditionary army from the Great Demonic Star Cluster, we can negotiate with the Nephilim and Zerg after eliminating the Void Empire's expeditionary army. Of course, they must pay a certain price in exchange for the forgiveness of our endless allied army. This is my stance. Other than that, everything else can be discussed in person. If anyone must withdraw from the endless allied army, I won't stop them. However, you must also be mentally prepared. Once you withdraw, don't even think about coming back." Qinchuan's words were not considered harsh, but it made everyone's heart tremble. The expressions on their faces became extremely serious. When the endless allied army was first established, some small and medium-sized forces withdrew from the endless allied army. After that, their encounters could be said to be very miserable. At that time, they were still rejoicing, but they did not expect to face such a situation now. Someone forced a smile and said to Qinchuan, "Qin Shuai, this matter can still be discussed." Qinchuan smiled and said indifferently, "Everything else can be discussed, but this is the only thing that has no room for discussion. I still stand by my words. The Nephilim and Zerg can be spared for the time being, but the Void Empire's expeditionary army must be dealt with." When everyone saw that Qinchuan's attitude was so firm, naturally, some were happy, while others were sad. The happy ones were naturally the ones who were calling for war. In their opinion, Qinchuan's move was obviously to divide the demon faction and defeat them one by one. However, the most brilliant part of this move was that Qinchuan did not completely suppress the various forces who advocated disbanding the endless allied army. Instead, he was stalling for time. After the Void Empire's expeditionary army was dealt with, the endless allied army would face much less pressure. As for the worried party, they felt that with both the Nephilim race and the Zerg race having ultimate existences, it would be impossible for them to completely defeat the Demon Alliance even if they continued the war relentlessly. If they were to provoke the ultimate existences, it would be even more disastrous. In their opinion, continuing the war was an arduous and unrewarding task. However, faced with the punishment of withdrawing from the endless coalition army, they were somewhat hesitant. Qinchuan did not care what others thought. His attitude was right there, and he did not think as much as the others. From the beginning to the end, his goal was to destroy the Void Empire's expeditionary army. If no one has any objections, then this matter is over. Now that our reinforcements have arrived, we now have a total of more than 6 billion troops, enough to contend with the demon faction head-on. Please make your own preparations. Meeting adjourned. As Qinchuan said, meeting adjourned, everyone in the conference room got up and walked out one after another. Qinchuan continued to sit in his original position. He turned his head to look at Chen Chongqing and asked, "How do you feel recently?" Chen Chongqing grinned and said, "I feel pretty good. Boss, you are fanning the flames everywhere. Although we are at the front, we don't feel any pressure." Qinchuan did not know whether to laugh or cry when he heard Chen Chongqing's words. What did he mean by fanning the flames everywhere? He had always been the passive party. After waiting for everyone to leave, Qinchuan asked Chen Chongqing, "Did you find out who was the first to propose disbanding the allied army?" "I found out. It was the Fire Spirit tribe." The person who spoke was Yaorao, who had returned. Yaorao was mainly responsible for collecting information, and this matter was investigated by her. Qinchuan slightly frowned as he heard this, and asked, "Did the Fire Spirit tribe make any unusual movements recently?" "Not for the time being. Other than proposing disbanding the allied army, they did not make any special movements." Yaorao looked at Qinchuan and asked, "How are your injuries?" "They are already healed." Qinchuan smiled and said to Yaorao, "You have worked hard in this period of time. If there is nothing else, then I will take my leave first." Yaorao bluntly turned around and said, "I will continue to keep an eye on those people who proposed disbanding the allied army. If there is any news, I will immediately inform you." After Yaorao left, Chen Chongqing winked at Qinchuan and asked, "Boss, do you have any regret in your heart?" Qinchuan unhappily said, "Get lost." Chen Chongqing mischievously smiled and said, "Boss, with your current status, you can completely sit and enjoy the happiness of having multiple wives." Qinchuan very seriously shook his head and said, "I have already made a mistake once before. I have done something shameful to her. Now I don't want to make a mistake a second time. I will be shameful to anyone. Don't say this kind of words again in the future." Seeing Qinchuan's serious attitude, Chen Chongqing immediately restrained the smile on his face and said, "I am sorry, boss. I will absolutely not mention this matter again in the future." Qinchuan patted Chen Chongqing's shoulder and said, "It's fine, let's go back." Just when Qinchuan was preparing to leave the conference room, his optical computer suddenly received a message from Galaska. Void Spirit had awakened again. Moreover, he had a very important matter to tell Qinchuan. After receiving this news, Qinchuan immediately set off for Tiger Fang's star and arrived at the Voidrace encampment. Under Galaska's lead, Qinchuan once again met Void Spirit. After a period of deep sleep and recuperation, Void Spirit's complexion had improved a little, but his body was still surrounded by a heavy aura of lethargy. It seemed that other than his injuries being healed, there was not much other obvious change in other aspects. When Void Spirit saw Qin Chuan arrive, he immediately said to Qin Chuan, "He's here." Hearing this out of the blue, Qin Chuan could not help but be stunned for a moment. He asked with some confusion, "He's here? Who's here?" Void Spirit looked at Qin Chuan with an extremely solemn gaze and said in a deep voice, "Kasisna, the person who stole my power." Hearing Void Spirit's answer, Qin Chuan's expression immediately became serious. Void Spirit panted slightly and then said, "Kasisna is an extremely dangerous person. In terms of realm and strength, he is infinitely close to the peak of existence. He can be called a demigod." Chapter 13:11. If a supreme existence in the tribulation stage could be called an immortal, then a supreme existence would be a true god. As for Kasisna, who had stolen the power of a hollow spirit that was originally a god, he could naturally be called a demigod. Although it sounded like a demigod and did not seem to be very powerful, in fact, Kasisna's strength was completely above the tribulation stage. This was also the reason why Hollow suddenly woke up and called Qin Chuan. Kasisna's sudden arrival was absolutely unusual. At this time, the Arcane Church still didn't know that Fadertic had fallen. If he knew about this, he would probably understand why Kasisna suddenly came. Kasisna's sudden arrival may have something to do with Fadertic's fall. Qin Chuan pondered for a moment and whispered, "It seems that the demon faction's counterattack should be coming soon." Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Hollow was slightly stunned. At this time, he noticed that Qin Chuan's aura had undergone a completely different change compared to the last time. He had already reached the tribulation stage. Hollow was very surprised and said, "You are already at grade 2? No, you should be at the tribulation stage." Qin Chuan nodded and replied, "I was just lucky." Hearing this, Su Ling sighed and said, "It's really rare to see a talented young man like you." Qin Chuan smiled and said, "Let's talk about Kasisna first." Hollow nodded and returned to the topic. He said to Qin Chuan, "Not long ago, I was in a state of deep sleep. Suddenly, I had some strange telepathy and saw Kasisna's arrival." Saw? Qin Chuan was a little puzzled. "Senior, how did you see Kasisna's arrival?" Hollow explained to Qin Chuan, "Kasisna stole my power to become a demigod, so there is a certain telepathy between me and him. When he came, my divine power would be connected with his demigod power. Therefore, I could see his arrival." Hearing Su Ling's words, Qin Chuan asked curiously, "Senior, is the divine power that is of a higher level than immortal power?" Su Ling nodded and said, "That's right. The power of the supreme existence you speak of is the divine power evolved from the immortal power. However, in our Void Empire, this power is called the power of nothingness. It is the power that was born at the beginning of the world." Hearing Su Ling's explanation, Qin Chuan nodded and asked, "How can immortal power evolve into divine power?" Su Ling replied, "If you want to transform immortal power into divine power, you need to almost completely control a kind of power of law. You can understand that divine power is the power of laws after it has advanced. The divine power of every supreme existence is limited to the power of laws they control." Hearing this, Qin Chuan asked again, "In other words, there is no divine power outside the range of the power of laws controlled by the ultimate existences?" Su Ling nodded and said, "Yes, that's right." Through Su Ling's explanation, Qin Chuan finally had a clearer understanding of the ultimate existence. At this time, he finally understood why the evil power of laws in his body was so strange and difficult to dispel. It should be the divine power of the demon emperor. What about the demigod? Qin Chuan was a little curious. Is the power of the demigod also considered divine power? Su Ling nodded and then shook his head. Although the power of the demigod can be considered divine power, it is not pure divine power. It is an incomplete divine power. The power of the demigod is stronger than the immortal power, but compared to the real divine power, the power of the demigod is also limited. For example, the power of the demigod is weaker, and the power of the demigod is thin and limited. Hearing this, Qin Chuan asked, "Senior, can you be more specific?" Su Ling coughed softly and continued patiently, "The ultimate existences can be called gods, but the demigod is only stronger than the tribulation stage. They can't be compared with the ultimate existences. Moreover, the demigod can only store a limited amount of demigod power in his body. Once it is used up in a battle, he needs time to accumulate it again. When accumulating the power of the demigod, there is no difference between the demigod and the ordinary tribulation stage." Su Ling paused for a moment and said, "You can understand the power of the demigod as the energy cabin of a spaceship. Once the energy in the cabin is used up, the spaceship can't continue to fly. It needs to be recharged before it can continue to fly. Although the real divine power is not endless, it can be recovered at any time." Hearing Su Ling's simple and straightforward explanation, Qin Chuan had a clear understanding of the power of the demigod. He said to Su Ling, "That is to say, when the power of the demigod is used up, it is not terrible." Su Ling nodded and replied, "Yes, that's right." Speaking of this, Su Ling paused for a moment and said, "In fact, if a tribulation stage cultivator wants to become an ultimate existence, he doesn't need to be a demigod. The reason why Kasisna became a demigod is that his divine power was not obtained through his own comprehension of the power of laws, but by stealing it. It's also because of this that their demigod powers are so limited." Hearing Su Ling's words, Qin Chuan looked at Su Ling with a subtle gaze and asked, "Senior, are you also a demigod now?" Su Ling nodded and sighed. "Yes, I'm also a demigod. In the Void Empire, there are 3 demigods. In addition to Kasisna and me, there's also Zadie." Su Ling's divine power was divided into 3 parts. Kasisna and Zadie occupied at least 80%, while Su Ling occupied only 20%, and this 20% was still declining. "Qin Chuan, I suspect that the main purpose of Kasisna's arrival this time is not to command the army to continue fighting, but for me." Su Ling took a deep look at Qin Chuan and said, "Once I die, a real first grade will definitely appear between Zadie and Kasisna, which is the ultimate existence. This is what they have been dreaming of." Hearing Su Ling's words, Qin Chuan frowned slightly and asked, "Senior, how long can Kasisna's demigod power last for? And it has such a suppressive effect on tribulation stage cultivators?" If he could not figure out this matter, Qin Chuan would definitely not dare to face Kasisna easily. Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Su Ling said to Qin Chuan, "If the demigod's power is completely used in battle, he can fight continuously for about 10 minutes. The power of the demigod's power should be about 3 times that of immortal power. If you want to defeat Kasisna, you have to first exhaust his demigod's power. However, Kasisna knows his weakness, so he probably won't give you a chance." Chapter 13:12. The power of the demigod was limited, and he could only fight for about 10 minutes. The power of the demigod was about 3 times that of the immortal power. After receiving this information, Qin Chuan's brows furrowed. 10 minutes might not sound like a long time, but when experts exchanged blows, especially top-tier experts, victory and defeat would often be decided in the blink of an eye. Even life and death would be determined. With the suppression effect of the power of the demigod on the immortal power, 10 minutes was probably enough for Kasisna to kill a bunch of people in the crossing calamity stage. In this case, the people in the crossing calamity stage could not be called the supreme existence, because in the eyes of the demigod, they were at most like cats and dogs. Just thinking about facing Kasisna gave Qin Chuan a headache. From Su Ling's words, it was not difficult for Qin Chuan to understand that Su Ling wanted to be protected by him. However, this was a little too difficult for Qinchuan. Although he was stronger than the ordinary people in the crossing calamity stage, he was still a little worse than a demigod. Seeing the embarrassment on Qinchuan's face, Su Ling asked, "You think you are no match for Casisna, don't you?" When Qinchuan heard Su Ling's words, he smiled bitterly and nodded. "Senior, to tell you the truth, not long ago, I was hit by the Devil Emperor and almost died. Although Casisna is only a demigod, I don't think I am a match for him." Hearing Qinchuan's words, Su Ling suddenly said, "I remember that the last time I woke up, I still have a question to answer you." Qinchuan's expression changed slightly when he heard this. He said, "Senior, do you want me to protect you in exchange for the answer to this question?" Su Ling shook his head and said, "I don't mean that. I can understand your difficulties and tell you about Casisna. I just want you to be more careful." Hearing Su Ling's answer, Qinchuan's expression became a little awkward. He said with some shame, "I'm sorry for gauging the heart of a gentleman with my own mean measure." Regardless of whether Su Ling's words were sincere or not, he had already made his stance clear. However, Qinchuan obviously didn't want to protect Su Ling. He seemed a little too selfish. When he realized this, Qinchuan's face turned a little ugly. He found that since he suffered the blow from Demon Emperor, he seemed to have lost his courage and became much more cautious. Whether it was when he was dealing with the internal division of the endless allied forces or when he was facing the obscure request of Su Ling, he was seeking stability. He was no longer as domineering and confident as before. This was not a good thing. Other than relying on various fortuitous encounters, Qinchuan was able to come this far because he was young, confident, capable, and dared to do things that others did not dare to do. Because of this, he was able to obtain various benefits that others could not obtain. But now, when he first reached the crossing calamity stage, he was also high-spirited. But since he was lucky enough to escape from the Devil Emperor's attack, everything seemed to have changed. Could it be that the power of the Devil Emperor has an invisible influence on me? Qinchuan frowned slightly. The water of the Heaven Lake could wash away the power of the evil law, but it could not wash away the subtle influence of the evil law on him. This was the only explanation that Qinchuan could think of. Thinking of this, Qinchuan took a deep breath and asked Su Ling, "Senior, can the power of the Supreme Existence have a spiritual influence on people at a lower realm?" Su Ling seemed to think of something and asked Qinchuan, "Do you think that the blow of the Devil Emperor has a spiritual influence on you?" Qinchuan nodded and said, "I do have such a guess." Su Ling thought for a moment and then replied, "In fact, this is a normal thing. The reason why the Supreme Existence is called a god is because the influence of a god is so great that it is even omnipresent. The Devil Emperor controls the evil law. As long as there is evil in this world, his influence will exist. Perhaps when you were hit by the Devil Emperor, he had already planted a seed in your heart, and it was this seed that affected you." Hearing Su Ling's words, Qinchuan frowned and asked, "How can I find this seed? Let me take a look at it for you. Open your heart and allow my power to enter your body." Although Su Ling's realm had fallen and he could barely be regarded as a demigod, it was not a problem for him to help Qinchuan check the abnormalities in his body. When Qinchuan opened his heart and did not set up any defense, Su Ling raised his hand and gently pointed. A force of the void entered Qinchuan's body and wandered inside. When the force of the void reached Qinchuan's abdomen, a dark light spot suddenly appeared and defeated the force of the void. This sudden change made Qinchuan's face turn extremely ugly in an instant. Su Ling was right. The Devil Emperor had indeed planted a seed in his body. Su Ling pondered for a moment and then said to Qinchuan, "This is indeed a seed that only a god can plant. This seed will affect you imperceptibly and make you unconsciously fear evil." A sense of fear in the face of evil? Hearing Su Ling's explanation, Qinchuan's face could not help but turn pale. He thought of the decision he made when facing the internal division of the endless allied army. He did not suppress all the voices of opposition and decisively made the decision to defeat the entire demon alliance. Instead, he decided to deal with the expeditionary army of the Void Empire first and let the Nephilim and Zerg go for the time being. At that time, Qin Chuan was worried about the interference of the Nephilim king and the Zerg queen. But now that he thought about it, wasn't this a manifestation of his fear of evil? Just now, when facing the possible threat of Kasisna and evil, he also chose to retreat out of fear. In the past, when he was still in the body fusion stage, he did not retreat when facing the Demon King's shadow. When he faced Furio, he fought with his life on the line. When he destroyed the portal of the Void Empire, he faced Feta Tig directly. In the past, when had he not faced the strong as the weak? When faced with the strong, he had never thought of retreating, nor had he ever hesitated. But now, because of the influence of this seed, he had made a series of decisions that were extremely out of line with his character. If he hadn't discovered the existence of this seed in time and allowed this seed to continue to exert a subtle influence on him, perhaps it wouldn't have been long before he became a coward who didn't dare to make any moves in the face of evil, a coward. Just thinking about it made Qin Chuan feel cold all over. An ultimate existence was really incomparably terrifying. Slap. Qin Chuan slapped his cheek hard. Just now, he was once again afraid of evil. Chapter 13:13. At this time, Qin Chuan had realized that the influence of the seed on him had become more and more profound. After being exposed, the seed was no longer hidden. It was openly affecting his mind in his abdomen. Senior, how can I get rid of this seed? Since he had already discovered this seed, Qin Chuan would definitely not allow this seed to continue to stay in his body. At this time, Su Ling had also understood that the reason why Qin Chuan had shown his fear of Kasisna before was because of the influence of this seed. Without this seed, even if Qin Chuan was afraid of Kasisna, he would never have made the decision to retreat directly. Faced with Qin Chuan's question, Su Ling replied regretfully, "I'm sorry, I can't help you now. You can only rely on your own strength to solve the trouble this seed has brought you." Qin Chuan frowned and asked, "What should I do?" "Defeat evil head-on and the seed will collapse." Su Ling said to Qin Chuan, "To be specific, you have to defeat the evil you are afraid of and rebuild your confidence and courage." Hearing Su Ling's words, Qin Chuan knew what to do. Now, there were only two evils that he was afraid of. One was the complete demon alliance, and the other was the demigod Kasisna. For Qin Chuan at this stage, it was extremely difficult to defeat either of these two evils. In comparison, defeating Kasisna was even easier, because the complete demon alliance also included Kasisna. Su Ling looked at the dignified expression on Qin Chuan's face and comforted Qin Chuan. "In fact, you don't have to be so worried. Your potential is infinite. I think very highly of you." Hearing Su Ling's comforting words, Qin Chuan could not help but smile bitterly. He was already at the tribulation stage and was already a supreme existence. What potential did he need? Could he become a supreme existence in a short time? Looking at the bitter smile on Qin Chuan's face, Su Ling said to Qin Chuan, "Do you think I'm just comforting you?" Qin Chuan heard this and asked, "Isn't it?" Su Ling pursed his lips and said, "Let's go back to the previous topic, about the answer last time. Maybe after hearing this answer, you will know why I said your potential is infinite." "What's the answer?" Qin Chuan could not help looking forward to it, and he could not wait. Su Ling took a deep look at Qin Chuan and said, "The reason why you was eroded by the power of the void when he was the emperor was his own choice. The reason why he made this choice was that he wanted to become the first person in history." Before Qin Chuan could ask again anxiously, Su Ling continued, "Above the divine power, there is a stronger power, which was born at the beginning of the world and the universe. It is called chaos. The power of chaos is the beginning of all power, and at the same time, it is the root of all power. If you can control the power of chaos, he will become a godlike existence. The power of chaos. A godlike existence. After hearing Su Ling's words, Qin Chuan was deeply shocked. He thought that the supreme existence was the limit, but he did not expect Yu's ambition to be even greater. But what does this have to do with you being eroded by the power of the void? Qin Chuan was puzzled. Was there any necessary connection between you being eroded by the power of the void and you wanting to become a godlike existence? Su Ling did not answer Qin Chuan's question immediately. Instead, he said to Qin Chuan, "In fact, you have had such an experience before. You should remember how you integrated the law of thunder and the law of space when you advanced to the form synthesis stage." Qin Chuan was stunned for a moment, and then his face was full of shock. He said, "The power of the void. I integrated the law of thunder and the law of space with the help of the power of the void." Until now, Qin Chuan could still clearly remember that the power of the void suddenly emerged in the void lotus, and the law of thunder and the law of space, which were extremely difficult to integrate, were inexplicably integrated. "Yes, it's the power of the void." Su Ling sighed and said to Qin Chuan, "As the first power of law separated from the power of chaos, the power of the void is like a neutralizer, which can integrate two incompatible powers of law together. And this is exactly what imperial magic needs." Qin Chuan frowned and said, "Does you want to integrate all the powers of law with the power of the void? This idea is too crazy." However, Su Ling shook his head and said to Qin Chuan, "You're wrong. Although the power of law in the world is separated from the power of chaos, if you want to control the power of chaos, you only need to control the three main powers of law that make up the power of chaos." Hearing this, Qin Chuan seemed to think of something, and his face gradually became extremely shocked. Seeing the expression on Qin Chuan's face, Su Ling knew that Qin Chuan already had the answer in his heart. He nodded gently and said, "You're right. The three powers of law are the law of the void, the law of time, and the law of space." As Su Ling's voice fell, Qin Chuan's doubts were all solved. He had understood everything. You controlled the law of time, and the ancestral Gregon controlled the law of space. Only by killing the ancestral Gregon could you control the law of space. As the master of the law of the void, Su Ling's power was stolen, and he fell from the position of a god to a demigod. Before a new master of the law of the void appeared, you could freely use the power of the law of the void without any additional worries. Perhaps, if the ancestral Gregon had not taken part of the power of the law of time from you before he died, you might have achieved his goal. As for the destruction of most of the human and demon clans, perhaps you did not want there to be anyone in this world who could control the law of time and space, which could threaten him. Thinking of this, Qin Chuan felt cold all over, and his heart was extremely cold. Looking at the silent Qin Chuan, Su Ling said faintly, "As long as you can control the law of time and space, he can use the power of the law of the void to integrate the law of time and space. Under the condition of controlling the law of time and space, he can already become an existence second only to the God of creation. There is absolutely no one in the universe who can be his opponent. He can kill all potential threats without any scruples, and then slowly integrate all the power of law into the law of uncontrollable law, fusing it into the power of chaos." Now, more than half of you had succeeded, and the other half was in Qin Chuan's hands. Because apart from you, Qin Chuan was the only one who could control the law of time and space at the same time, so Qin Chuan and you were destined to be enemies. Chapter 13-14. Hearing Su Ling's words, Qin Chuan took a deep breath and said firmly, "I want to defeat him. I want to stop his plan." Hearing this, Su Ling took a deep look at Qinchuan and said, "But the gap between you two is too big. I don't know why you keeps you alive and doesn't kill you, but I know that if you wants to kill you, you won't be able to survive." It had been a long time since Su Ling had been alive. As far as he knew, no one could be as powerful and ambitious as you. You didn't kill Qinchuan now, but it didn't mean that you would let Qinchuan continue to grow. He had a hunch that the grudge between Qinchuan and you would soon be settled. "I know, but I have to stop him. I have to stop him with my life." Qinchuan gritted his teeth and said in a deep voice, "I want to seek justice for those seniors who sacrificed themselves because of Yu's ambition." Qinchuan knew very well that what he was saying now was crazy, irrational, and even a little laughable. However, these were his true thoughts. Even if his arms and legs were broken, he would still use his teeth to bite off Yu's neck. He had never hated a person so much and wanted to kill a person so much. Compared to the likes of Kasisna, Yu Kai is truly the most evil person. Crack. At this moment, Qinchuan's abdomen suddenly made a faint sound of something breaking. When Qinchuan subconsciously sensed his abdomen, he unexpectedly found that the seed planted by the Devil Emperor had collapsed. Looking at the seed that had already disappeared, Qinchuan came to a realization. It was his courage to face you that had destroyed the seed. Is this really possible? Qinchuan was a little confused. Didn't they say that the seed could only be destroyed by defeating the evil? Right now, he had only made up his mind. Su Ling was also very surprised. He didn't expect that Qinchuan would destroy the seed in such a strange way. But thinking about it carefully, it was a very reasonable thing. Perhaps no one in the universe could be more evil than the crazy Yu. Since Qinchuan could be determined to defeat Yu and stop Yu's plan, Qinchuan naturally had the courage and confidence to face the evil. Therefore, it was reasonable for the seed to collapse. Just now, didn't you think of retreating? Su Ling was a little curious. When Qinchuan faced the evil before, he was always affected by the seed and subconsciously wanted to retreat. But just now, Qinchuan expressed his attitude very firmly, unusually brave. Qinchuan shook his head and replied, "When I learned the truth, there was only anger left in my heart. I didn't think of retreating at all." Hearing Qinchuan's words, Su Ling nodded gently and sighed. "You are indeed the only person in the universe who can pose a threat to you. Only with such willpower can you be qualified to face you." Qinchuan pursed his lips and said, "Predecessor, I will do my best." Su Ling looked at Qinchuan with a slightly complicated look and said, "If Kasisna really comes to me, then I will give you a good luck." Qinchuan didn't ask Su Ling what the good luck was. Even if there was no good luck, he would do his best to kill Kasisna. If he couldn't even kill a demigod, how could he be qualified to face you, who was more terrifying than the ultimate being? Demon Palace. Kasisna, who was covered in a dark purple cloak, stood in front of Forio. That powerful aura had an extremely strong suppressive effect on the weak Forio, and it even made Forio tremble uncontrollably. "Tell me everything about Qinchuan and your battle. Don't leave out anything." Kasisna's low and hoarse voice came from under the cloak, making Forio feel the surrounding temperature suddenly drop by several dozen degrees. His entire body was extremely cold. When Forio reluctantly used complete words to tell Kasisna about Qinchuan, Kasisna suddenly sneered. "Interesting, what an interesting young man. I wonder if you will be grateful to me if I kill Qinchuan?" Thinking of the man who lived in seclusion in the imperial palace all year round, Kasisna couldn't help but become excited. He already couldn't wait to see the appearance of an unprecedentedly powerful Yu. Forio trembled with fear as he looked at Kasisna, whose laughter was gradually becoming somewhat crazy, and asked, "Excuse me, can I leave now?" Forio had never been so afraid of someone before. Even when he was being chased by Qinchuan, he had never been so afraid. Now, facing Kasisna, he felt as if he was facing the Grim Reaper. Hearing Forio's words, Kasisna sneered and said, "You can get lost." Forio felt as if he had been granted amnesty after hearing those words. He turned around and left without hesitation. If it was in the past, he definitely wouldn't turn his back to a powerhouse he didn't know. But facing Kasisna, who could easily obliterate him from the front, Forio had never thought of doing such a thing. Right now, he was only thinking of how to get away from Kasisna as quickly as possible. After Forio left, Kasisna originally wanted to leave as well, but he suddenly sensed something and raised his head to look at the sky. Above his head, there was a pair of eyes watching him, cold and indifferent. "You must be the mighty demon emperor." Facing this pair of eyes, Kasisna suddenly bowed very respectfully, appearing extremely calm. Facing Kasisna's perfect and impeccable etiquette, the pair of eyes slowly disappeared from the sky, while Kasisna maintained his bowing posture until 5 minutes later, when he straightened his body. "What a cold god, not even willing to say a word to a demigod like me." Kasisna mocked himself, and his body suddenly turned into void energy, disappearing from the spot. Universe Calendar, Year 1460, December. The demon faction, who had retreated to the Devil's Star for almost half a year, suddenly started a war again, marching into the Deus cluster. The endless allied army, who had long been prepared, resisted the demon faction's attack at the borders of the Deus cluster, and the flames of war reignited. At this moment, Qin Chuan, as the commander of the endless allied army, did not appear at the front lines. Instead, he was still overseeing the Io star cloud, and the task of commanding the frontline soldiers was handed over to Chen Chongqing. He, on the other hand, was stationed at Tiger Fang's star, patiently waiting for Kasisna to appear. Ever since Arcane woke up last time, he had not entered a deep sleep. He was constantly sensing Kasisna's position, and he could feel that Kasisna was on the way to Tiger Fang's star, and he was getting closer and closer. Chapter 13-15. Huya Planet. Qin Chuan was sitting on top of a tall building in the Void Race's base, looking at the sky absent-mindedly, as if he was thinking about something. Ever since he learned the truth that day, Qin Chuan would often sit here alone and be absent-minded. At first, Galaska would come over to chat with Qin Chuan, but after finding that Qin Chuan was not in the mood to chat, Galaska stopped coming over. One day, Su Ling suddenly appeared behind Qin Chuan and asked Qin Chuan, "What are you looking at?" Hearing Su Ling's words, Qin Chuan came back to his senses and said softly, "I'm looking at another universe, at the Void Empire." Su Ling pursed his lips slightly and said, "You shouldn't be able to see anything from here." Qin Chuan nodded, then shook his head and replied, "Indeed, I can't see anything, but I can imagine that everyone in the Void Empire, including Kasisna and Zadir, are nothing but tools for you. They are tools that he must use in the process of realizing his ambitions." Hearing Qin Chuan's answer, Su Ling asked, "Do you think the Void Empire is in a state of deep water and hot fire?" Qin Chuan turned his head to look at Su Ling and said, "I don't think the Void Empire will be a beautiful country under the rule of you, Zadie and Kasina." "What you said seems to make sense." Su Ling looked at Qin Chuan and asked, "So you sympathize with the people of the Void Empire?" Qin Chuan shook his head. Although he had some sympathy, he would never use it on the people of the Void Empire, because that was not kindness or sympathy. It should be called stupidity and stupidity. Seeing Qin Chuan shake his head, Su Ling asked again, "If one day you really defeat the Void Empire and how will you treat the people of the Void Empire?" "I don't know how to answer this question for the time being." Qin Chuan thought about it seriously and said, "Maybe I'll pin my hopes on you. At least before you, the Void Empire has never fought with us." Su Ling sighed and said, "As long as there are people in the universe, there will be conflicts of interest, and there will be wars, over and over again. Then let's end this war first. As for when the next war will break out and what it will be like, Perhaps it has nothing to do with us. Qin Chuan stood up from his chair and said to Su Ling, "Today's thinking time is over. I'm going back." "No, you can't go." Su Ling suddenly looked into the distance and said to Qin Chuan, "He's here." Hearing Su Ling's words, Qin Chuan suddenly turned around and looked into the distance. A vague purple light spot was approaching at a high speed. In just a breath, it appeared thousands of miles away. At this moment, Qin Chuan finally saw the other party's appearance clearly. It was a person whose entire body was covered in a deep purple cloak. "Is he Kasisna?" Qin Chuan asked Su Ling, looking at the dark purple figure seriously. In his perception, the person in front of him was just an ordinary person, but Qin Chuan would never believe that an ordinary person could have such amazing speed and appear here inexplicably. Su Ling nodded and replied, "My feeling can't be wrong. He is Kasisna." Just as Qin Chuan and Su Ling were talking, a low laugh came from afar. A pair of scarlet eyes appeared under the dark purple hood. They looked at Qin Chuan and Su Ling playfully, as if they had found something particularly interesting. "I originally wanted to find you after dealing with this old guy, but I didn't expect you to be here. You saved me a lot of time." When Kasisna saw Su Ling and Qin Chuan standing together, he had already guessed that Su Ling must have sensed his arrival, so he invited Qin Chuan to help him. Qin Chuan couldn't help but frown when he heard Kasisna's words. Kasisna's voice was extremely special. It was like a venomous snake's tongue, and it gave off an extremely sinister and terrifying feeling. Su Ling looked at Kasisna with a cold expression and snorted. "Humph! After so many years, you still like to hide your head and show your tail, pretending to be a ghost." "No, no, no, I'm just worried that my appearance is too horrible and will scare you." Kasisna laughed. "Let's end our reminiscing here. Su Ling, do you want to kill yourself, or do you want me to do it?" As for Qin Chuan, Kasisna had already ignored him. After dealing with Su Ling, he would naturally go back to deal with Qin Chuan. Before Su Ling could respond to Kasisna, Qin Chuan took a step forward and stood in front of Su Ling. He looked at Kasisna sharply and asked, "What's your relationship with you?" Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Kasisna asked, "What does it have to do with you?" Qin Chuan took a deep look at Kasisna and said in a deep voice, "I will use your death to tell you that one day I will kill him." "Ridiculous!" Kasisna sneered and raised his hand to point at Qin Chuan. A dark purple power shot out and appeared in front of Qin Chuan almost the next moment, hitting Qin Chuan in the chest. However, to everyone's surprise, Kasisna's finger failed to repel Qin Chuan. Kasisna looked at the domineering golden armor on Qin Chuan's body and said disdainfully, "You're a human, but you actually like to play with the Zerg." Qin Chuan lowered his head and glanced at the dent on the chest of the Holy Monarch armor. He inwardly breathed a sigh of relief. Previously, he had thought of using the Holy Monarch armor to block Kasisna's attack. However, he had never been certain whether it would be useful. Now, it seemed that not only was it useful, but it was also extremely useful. Be careful. That attack just now was not demigod power. At this moment, Su Ling suddenly poured a bucket of cold water on Qin Chuan's head. Kasisna did not use demigod power in this attack, just a mortal power. Qin Chuan was a little surprised and asked, "The power of this attack is already so great, but it is not demigod power?" Su Ling nodded and said to Qin Chuan, "If you can't take out the ability to make Kasisna feel threatened, then Kasisna would rather fight with you for a long time to get rid of you than use demigod power." Demigod's power was extremely limited and difficult to recover. If it wasn't necessary, Kasisna would never use Demigod's power so easily. In Kasisna's eyes, dealing with Qin Chuan wasn't a difficult task. He wanted to leave Demigod's power for Arcane Church. Chapter 13-16. After learning that Kasisna wouldn't use his demigod power so easily, Qin Chuan's expression couldn't help but turn a little ugly. His original intention was to exhaust Kasisna's demigod power through a battle of attrition and then find a way to defeat him. In the end, there was a problem at the first step of his plan. Kasisna simply looked down on him and was unwilling to waste his demigod power on him. In that case, I'll beat you until you have no choice but to use your demigod power. Qin Chuan growled and summoned the heavenly demon seal. He stimulated the dragon phantom and the human phantom to attack Kasisna. In the face of Qin Chuan's counterattack, Kasisna stood in place and did not move. When the dragon phantom and the human phantom approached him, two void forces suddenly appeared around Kasisna. They entangled the dragon phantom and the human phantom like chains. In the blink of an eye, the two phantoms were bound and then torn apart. When the dragon phantom and the human phantom collapsed, Kasisna was about to say something to mock Qin Chuan when a spatial portal suddenly appeared behind him. An arm holding a ball of lightning stretched out from it and accurately blasted the lightning at Kasisna's back. Buzz! Just as Qin Chuan's Leifa was about to hit Kasisna, a ball of void force suddenly appeared on Kasisna's back and completely engulfed Leifa, as if nothing had happened. Kasisna did not look back at the situation behind him at all. He looked at Qin Chuan in the distance with a playful gaze and sneered, "Do you think this kind of sneak attack will work on me?" Qin Chuan's expression was somewhat gloomy as he retracted his arm and closed the spatial door. He had used the heavenly demon seal to feign an attack from the front. His original intention was to use the space-traversing technique to attack Kasisna from behind. However, what he didn't expect was that his thunder technique was unable to shake Kasisna's defenses at all. Leifa had already evolved when I advanced to the tribulation stage. It went from 1,000 caddies to 1,000 caddies. Among the many methods I have, its lethality is enough to rank in the top 3, but this attack did not have any effect on Kasisna. Is it because his defense is too strong, or is my attack too weak? Just as Qin Chuan was feeling puzzled, the arcane spirit answered for Qin Chuan. Don't panic. Kasisna was able to block your Leifa just now because of the uniqueness of the power of the void, which is its neutralization property. The power of the void neutralized your Leifa and smoothed out Leifa's lethality. As a demigod, the power of the void that Kasisna controls is different from the power of the void that the people you have encountered in the past control. Although the name was also called the power of the void, to be precise, what Kasisna controlled should be the power of the law of the void. The meaning of the word law was completely different. For example, although they were both spaceships, a war-class spaceship could not be compared to an carrier-class spaceship. Hearing the arcane spirit's explanation, Qin Chuan frowned and said, "Doesn't that mean that Kasisna is already in an invincible position?" "No." The arcane spirit shook his head and said to Qin Chuan, "The power of the void is special. The power of the law of space and the power of the law of time that you control are also special. You have to deal with the power of the void with the same power." "I understand." Qin Chuan took a deep look at Kasisna, raised his hand, and tentatively swung the void piercing at Kasisna. The void piercing was the same as Leifa. They were both extremely destructive moves that Qin Chuan had mastered. Previously, Kasisna had easily blocked Leifa. This time, Qin Chuan switched to the void-piercing attack to test whether Kasisna could block it as easily as before. The moment Qin Chuan used the void-piercing, the space around Kasisna suddenly shattered and turned into countless sharp blade-like existences that stabbed at Kasisna. At the same time, a silver-white wavy blade in the shape of a half-moon accurately slashed at Kasisna's waist. Kasisna snorted coldly, and a large amount of the power of the law of the void suddenly emerged around him, condensing into a spherical shield with him as the center. After the sharp space fragments and the void piercing hit the shield formed by the power of the void, although they could not tear the shield apart, they successfully had a certain impact on the shield, weakening the dark purple shield to a light purple color. Sure enough, the void piercing is effective. Seeing this scene, Qin Chuan understood. The arcane spirit was right. He needed to use the power of the law of space and the power of the law of time to deal with Kasisna. Without using the demigod power, although Kasisna was also very strong, his ability to suppress Qin Chuan was reduced to the minimum. Space collapse. Qin Chuan did not hesitate. He directly used the power of the law of space to completely tear apart the space around Kasisna, creating a huge black hole. The huge suction force generated by the black hole caused Kasisna's figure to move uncontrollably toward the black hole. Void. Kasisna raised his hand and pointed at the black hole through the shield. The power of the law of the void emerged and flattened the black hole. Seeing this, Qin Chuan's face suddenly turned cold. He attacked again and tore apart the black hole that Kasisna had just flattened. This time, the area of the black hole became larger than before, with a radius of over 1,000 meters. Boring trick. Kasisna did not care. He once again used the power of the law of the void to flatten the huge black hole. At this moment, Qin Chuan used the same trick again and tore apart the black hole again. The area of the black hole also became larger. Just as Kasisna was about to flatten the black hole that appeared for the third time impatiently, Qin Chuan's figure appeared in front of Kasisna in an instant using the space traversal technique. A golden sword appeared in Qin Chuan's hand and stabbed straight at Kasisna's chest. Everything Qin Chuan had done before was just to confuse Qin Chuan. This sword was the real killer move. At this moment, facing Qin Chuan's sword, Kasisna's face changed drastically. He was no longer as calm as before. Runic sword. Kasisna looked at the blade stabbing at his chest and exclaimed in shock. In the face of the attack of the runic sword, Kasisna's power of the law of the void was completely useless, so he had no choice but to use the power of the demigod. Clang! A translucent purple-black round shield appeared in front of Kasisna's chest and blocked the attack of the runic sword. However, in just a moment the round shield shattered. At this moment, Kasisna had already taken the opportunity to pull away and was temporarily in a safe state. "How do you have the runic sword?" Kasisna stared at Qin Chuan with an extremely shocked and distorted expression. In order to block the attack of the runic sword just now, he had used at least 30% of his demigod power. Chapter 13-17. Qin Chuan was not interested in answering Kasisna's question, because there was a problem with the runic sword at this moment. After the sword pierced through the round shield condensed by Kasisna's demigod power, the power of the runic sword suddenly disappeared by 30%. Originally, the runic sword had only recovered about 60% of its power, and now, half of it had disappeared. This meant that Qin Chuan might only have a chance to make another attack. If that attack did not kill Kasisna or completely exhaust Kasisna's demigod power, then the situation would not be good. How could this be? Qin Chuan frowned. The power of the runic sword had suddenly disappeared. Could it be that it had cancelled out Kasisna's demigod power? "I'm asking you, why is the runic sword in your hands?" Kasisna stared at Qin Chuan. Why did no one know such important information that the runic sword was in Qin Chuan's hands? Qin Chuan still ignored Kasisna. He focused his attention on the runic sword and tried to communicate with it. However, the runic sword's response made Qin Chuan's mood a little solemn. The power of the runic sword had been neutralized by Kasisna's demigod power. This response made Qin Chuan's head hurt. The power of the law of the void could neutralize Leifa, who was activated by the power of the law of thunder, and could also resist the sky piercing. Now, the demigod power could even neutralize the power of the runic sword. Didn't that mean that he could not defeat Kasisna no matter what? In fact, at the end of the day, it was still because the runic sword was not the runic sword that it had been in its heyday. Instead, it was a half-broken runic sword. Compared to the power of the demigod, a broken runic sword should not be much different. Thinking about it carefully, it was not unacceptable that the power of the runic sword would be offset. Previously, Qin Chuan had been thinking about how to completely repair the runic sword, but because the war had not ended, he had not done it. Now, Qin Chuan finally made a decision. After dealing with Kasisna, he would go to the Deus cluster and absorb all the power of the Tao symbols, striving to completely repair the runic sword. Moreover, he could also use his current status to collect rune stones. The only thing worth rejoicing about was that the power of the runic sword would not disappear forever after it was used, but would slowly recover. Just as Qin Chuan was thinking about these things, Kasisna was completely enraged. The way Qin Chuan ignored him was really hateful. No matter what method you use to obtain the runic sword, as long as I kill you, the runic sword will be mine. At this moment, because of his fear of the runic sword, Kasisna finally did not hold back. He once again used the demigod power, raised his hand, and threw a punch at Qin Chuan from afar. In the universe, a huge fist made of dark purple crystals appeared in front of Qin Chuan and bombarded the holy monarch armor on Qin Chuan's body. A violent roar suddenly erupted, and under the power of this punch, the holy monarch armor collapsed. Not only that, after the holy monarch armor collapsed, the crystal fist turned into fragments that filled the sky and shot towards Qin Chuan like sharp blades. Roar! At this critical moment, Qin Chuan suddenly transformed into a golden dragon and used the hard dragon scales on his dragon body as a shield to block the crystal blades that came from all directions. However, even the hard dragon scales could not completely block the crystal blades that contained the demigod power. In just a moment, Qin Chuan's body was covered in wounds, and golden blood kept flowing out. Although the crystal blades that contained the demigod power had disappeared, there were still some traces of the demigod power left in the wounds on Qin Chuan's body. This caused Qin Chuan's wounds to be unable to heal in a short period of time and were constantly bleeding. If this continued, it would not be long before Qin Chuan died from excessive blood loss. Seeing that Qin Chuan was still alive, Kasisna snorted coldly and said, "You're really tenacious. In that case, I'll send you on your last journey." Kasisna attacked again, and the power of the void law surged out. At the same time, Su Ling's figure suddenly appeared in front of Qin Chuan and blocked this extremely fatal blow for Qin Chuan. When Kasisna saw Su Ling attack, the expression on his face suddenly became extremely gloomy. He said, "Su Ling, you're courting death." Su Ling ignored Kasisna. He turned around and waved his palm at Qin Chuan. A gentle force sent Qin Chuan into the distance. At the same time, the demigod power attached to Qin Chuan's wounds also dissipated. "Qin Chuan, you're already very good. You've done well enough. Rest well and see how this old man educates a thief who likes to steal from others." Now that Qin Chuan was an arrow at the end of its flight, there was a high chance that he would die if he forced himself to fight with Kasisna. In order to protect Qin Chuan, Su Ling decided to settle the grudge between him and Kasisna personally. "Old man, you were no match for me back then, let alone now." Kasisna sneered disdainfully when he saw that Su Ling was going to attack personally. He raised his hand and took off the hood on his head, revealing his face in front of Su Ling and Qin Chuan. It was a face completely condensed from the power of the void law. Other than a pair of scarlet eyes, there were no other facial features. Back then, in order to steal Su Ling's power and become a demigod, Kasisna had paid a price. His body had been corroded and assimilated by the powerful divine power, turning him into what he was now. He was known as a demigod, but in reality, he was neither human nor ghost. Su Ling sighed when he saw Kasisna's appearance. "So, in order to steal my divine power, you turned yourselves into this ghostly appearance. Is Zadir the same?" Zadier's condition is better than mine. Kasisna looked at Su Ling with a gloomy gaze and said in a deep voice, I don't have much time left. If I can't kill you and obtain more divine power, then I will be completely corroded and assimilated one day, and then become a part of Zadier. So, I'm going to kill you, absorb your power, and then go back to have the final battle with Zadier. Hearing Kasisna's words, Su Ling's gaze suddenly became somewhat pitiful. In his eyes, Kasisna was a pitiful worm. He was known as a demigod, but in reality, he was a thief who relied on the divine power of others to maintain his own strength. Even if such a person obtained all the divine power and became a supreme existence, there was no other meaning except that he could continue to live. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.